There is a percentage of points earned and then what the state average percentage is. It'll start to make sense as we move through each indicator, okay? So let's get started. Academic achievement. This indicator produces a performance index for both ELA and mathematics. It is reported for all students and high need subgroups. The tests or the assessments that are included in these indicators would be the SBA, Smarter Balanced Assessment, grades 3 through 8, the SAT administered in grade 11, and the Connecticut Alternative Assessment, the CTAA, given to primarily students with special needs. So taking a look at what our results be, I'll let you read through those numbers. I will not read every single line with every number. I will call your attention, though, if you want an easy way to read this, on the points earned, which is the third numerical number, and then the percent of points earned. Those are easy ways to digest each of these. How did all of our students do in ELA? How did our students with high needs do in ELA? Then again, repeated for mathematics and repeated for science. What I will identify here is that we have opportunity. There is a gap between how our students who are considered high needs are performing and then compared to all students. You'll see that the percentage points earned for all students in ELA is 90.5. One could celebrate that that's a high level of achievement there. But there is also a 10.9 percentage point gap for students who are high needs. You'll see that pattern actually trending in mathematics as well as in science. Now we're going to move to academic growth. Academic growth uses SBA growth to standard model on a vertical scale. So even though each grade is scaled differently on your score, I'll just stop for a minute. Grade 3 scores yield a different range of, let's say it's 2,000 to 2,400 are the range of scores that a child can get. That is scaled differently in grade 4 because maybe it's going to be 2,300 to 2,800. And in grade 5, it might be 2,700 to 3,500. So in order to create a system that can measure growth, statisticians, not educators, take those scaled scores and they standardize them vertically so that you can take a look at how children are growing from grade to grade on the same test, even though it is scaled differently from grade to grade. So these points are also assigned on average percent of growth target. When you get to the students with English proficiency in literacy and in oral expression, those two lines are not based on SBA, but those assessments are based on the LOS links, which is a language proficiency assessment that we administer to all students whose primary language or first language is not English. So you will see here, as far as growth is concerned, we have movement, but likely movement that needs to be higher. So if you compare our percent points earned to the state average, in some areas, like in English language arts, our growth rate is slightly behind the state average. You might ask, well, where do you want us to be, Dr. Pataya? Thanks for the question. Most certainly above state average. So we have, while there may be a solid number for all students in ELA, if you compare it to the screen before, at 90.5 points earned, but growth in ELA is not something that is a point of celebration, but a point of opportunity for growth for us, okay? All right. Let's move to assessment participation rates. It is expected that 95% of our students participate in assessments. Now, you might say to yourself, but of course we would require all students to participate. At one time in the state of Connecticut, you do not have to test all students. In fact, many students, through potentially a PPT process or other means, were excused from that testing, or there were a higher percentage of students actually taking an alternative assessment. So the state kind of clamped down on that since starting this accountability system in 2017, and said that participation rates need to be at 95% or higher. And you will see on the next screen that we have a slight area of improvement there. We are hitting our 95% rate. We missed it by 1/10 of a point for students with high needs in mathematics, and 1.1 percentage points for students with high needs in science. And that number, I think, is easily attainable. We will just need to take a look at our students and really take a look at each child participating in the assessment. Now, chronic absenteeism is officially defined by the state as a percentage of students missing 10% or greater of the total number of days enrolled. I will tell you that this number is going to be a concern for me. You'll see here on the next page, albeit a little difficult to read because of how this layout came out on slides. I apologize ahead of time. But if you take a look at the percent of student points earned, it's 36.4%. You see that number there? For all students, and 4.5% for high needs students. That 36.4 is significantly low. If I take a look at the years past, we were scoring about 86% of those points available earned. So in doing our own analysis, Mr. Brown and I have talked about this on numerous occasions, particularly in 21-22. Now remember, I gave you the context for 21-22. At the start of last year, we were not the only school system having a hard time bringing kids back to in-person learning. If you remember those stories across the state, particularly high schoolers. So we experienced high levels of chronic absenteeism, and our high school staff worked diligently. We see a little bit of that carrying over into this year, and not because of a switch from an online platform to in-person, but because we have young people dealing much more with mental health issues, school phobia issues, issues that are facing our young people today in a post-COVID environment. So chronic absenteeism is something we should keep an eye on, and something that we are working and will continue to work on decreasing the number of students that would be identified as chronically absent, which means more than 10% of our days. Okay, let's keep moving. Another indicator is preparation for college career readiness, and it's based on the percentage of students in grades 11 and 12 only participating in at least one of the following during high school. So 2 courses in AP or ECE, 2 courses in one of 17 career technical education categories, and 2 work experience courses. And this is an area that we really excel in. As far as students participating in these types of courses, you'll see we earned 100% of the points possible. And we still have work to do. Now, there are 2 ways to look at access, and that is open the door to all kids, and know that some students may or may not hit a target of 3 or 4 in an AP test, or limit access and get higher scores. We choose to go with open the door to all kids, let them try an AP opportunity and experience, and you see that 66.6% of points earned, reflecting allowing all kids to take an AP course and a test, knowing that some may not make the required 3 or higher. In the area of graduation, the state looks at those students considered to be on track, including freshmen earning at least 5 credits. So that is the indicator. By the end of freshman year, do you have at least 5 credits under your belt? That will indicate to the state you're on track for graduating on time. A second indicator is the number of students graduating in 4 years or less. A third is the number of students in high needs subgroups who graduate in 6 years or less. And then a fourth indicator is a percentage of graduates who enroll in 2 or 4 year colleges. This is an area that we do very well in. You'll notice that All 4 indicators, we are earning 91.3 to 100% of the points available to be earned on this indicator. So we really make sure we get kids the solid programming they need throughout high school to graduate on time and with the supports they need. And then in physical education and arts access, physical fitness is measured using the 3rd generation physical fitness assessment that is given in grades 4, 6, 8, and 10. You'll see actually some of the results in the performance and profile report that we're going to go over soon. And you'll see that starting in 4th grade, our scores are not very good, and by the time they get to high school, kids' physical fitness is improving, thank goodness. And then arts access is a percentage of students in grades 9 through 12 participating in at least one dance, theater, music, or visual arts course in the school year. These results in physical fitness, we earned 73.9% of the possible points earned, and then 87% of points earned. So we do rather well in the arts, and we'd love to see that physical fitness number increase. But that's more than just providing for PE once or twice a week. That requires a whole different lifestyle. And you'll see in the performance profile some of the assessments that they're given, sit-ups, running a mile, some things that I don't think some adults can do right now, but certainly something that we provide for support through our physical education program. And finally, the entire assessment system boils down to an accountability index. The index, as I defined earlier, is the percent of all possible points earned. So the points we've earned post-COVID, a year after COVID, is 74.3 points. You might be wondering what was our last score before COVID hit. We had a nice increasing trend. We had hit 81.6 in 18-19 year. And in this 21-22 school year, our overall accountability index is 74.3. Here's a chart of the years prior to that. And then one last index is the district's gap size, is the difference in performance. This index is reported for non-high needs compared to high needs. It looks at ELA, math, and graduation rate. This chart indicates that we have not been identified as having a problem with performance gaps, even though I started off under indicator 2 saying I think there's room for growth. According to the state standard, we do not have a performance gap problem. As indicated as a gap and outlier, no, 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 no. Ms. Glennon, do you want me to stop and take questions here or jump into the profile performance?
Let's take questions on this first, I think would be helpful.
Okay.
Do you have questions from board members? Ms. Irby.
Thank you. For the chronic absenteeism page, could you just clarify for me so I understand? The 36.4%, does that mean that those were students that were absent less than 5% of the time?
So 36.4% does not mean it's 36.4% of our student body.
Okay.
It's just 36.4% of the points possibly earned. So this is an accountability system that is based on earning points toward an index, which was our 74.3. So it's cumulative, so based on 12 indicators, formulaically, you're earning points in each indicator. So we only earned 36% of the possible points, which is low. Compared to the year before COVID, we were earning 86% of the possible points, which meant we had fewer students who were considered chronically absent. We could, I think it's worth us talking about this in the future, because I feel like chronic absenteeism is hitting all of our school districts really hard right now.
Mm-hmm.
We've had that conversation internally about the number of kids that are missing more than the 18 days. I think it's 18 days. I had Lewis, yeah, okay. So to be chronically absent in Milford, you have to miss more than 18 days. That's a lot of days.
It is.
That assumes, I believe, a student who's here for the full year. You could have a student move in halfway through the year, and they could be absent often and be chronically absent as well, but even if it's less than 18 days. it depends
As long
on-
as you were registered with us on October 1st, right?
Yeah.
That's what this accountability index is based on.
Okay.
And I also think, Ms. Derby, as we get into the next report, we need to start digging into who are those kids? Where do they live? What's their socioeconomic background? All that.
Thank you.
Yep.
Other questions? Ms. Doyle?
Thank you. If I remember correctly from last year, when we had this conversation, there was a discussion of increasing academic performance in the ability of stepwise, almost. Some of our higher achieving students, it would be less, not that everything's about the points, but there's less room for some of our higher achieving students versus our high need students in terms of academic growth and assessment and ability to improve services. Is that accurate? And is that where we're kind of heading in terms of looking at the academic growth and where there is that 10-point difference between almost each section?
So, I think in improvement science theory, the higher level achieving you are, the more difficult it is to demonstrate growth, right? To get from 90 to 95 is harder than to get from 75 to 90, right? There are cycles of improvement that make that easier and easier to measure. So the higher performing we get as a system and even as a kid, the more difficult it is to score higher points on some of those growth indicators. I would not say that is the factor when you're considering what is the gap between growth in high needs and non-high needs. I would say that, and funny, we're talking about coaching tonight, I would say that we have to break a pattern there of getting to those kids and accelerating their learning in a different way that we're not doing just yet. So
Is there almost a map of students who are high needs and chronic absenteeism, of them mapping over the students where that kind of hits at the same point?
So one of the jobs of our current equity supervisor, Ms. Acampora, is to pull this data and drill down into demographically mapping out who are the kids who are chronically absent, who are the kids you'll see in this next report that are being regularly suspended, who are the kids that are being expelled, so we have as a system an opportunity to dig down into who are these young people, that we haven't really done that well. And that, I think, we won't have that ready in May, by the way, so. But that's our work ahead of us. So yes, I think in future reports, we should be digging into the definition of high need. We should be here internally, we know the answer, who are those kids?
Right. Okay, great, thank you.
Ms. Boynton?
Dr. Kataya, and I'm sorry if I'm asking you to re-explain something that you already said, but numbers aside, because I am someone very numbers challenged, can you just, in layman's terms, explain what this academic achievement and academic growth reports say?
Yep.
Yes, thank you.
So let's start with achievement. And I'm just gonna be layman-like, okay?
Please.
We're doing okay.
Okay.
We can do better. That ELA number surprises me. I'm not sure how we got 90.5. I was expecting to be lower. And in my next presentation, we will see that for the last 20 years, we've been okay. And we can do better. Our growth, I think, we need to focus in on our system of knowing where our kids are and establishing, not going back to one time where this board had numerical targets down to like the 100th. But internally, as leaders and teachers, having, understanding where kids are based on a system of internal assessments and setting goals for kids and knowing how kids are doing along the way and not waiting for this report to come out. So this, in the growth area, we could do better there as well. So
In each of these categories, ELA, math,
I would say yes.
okay.
When I'm taking a look at being below a state average, like that never makes the superintendent happy, right? But I'm also extending grace because we tested kids a month after they took their masks off. Now I think suffer a little bit from short-term memory, like on how hard COVID was for us. And there was a lot of rigmarole around that, if you remember. Mask on or off, how quickly do we let people in? Are we just shoving all the desks together right away? Like, so I think it was February 28th we took off masks. And that next month, literally SBA is here. And so I feel like this is a, hey, look what your baseline is, and there's room for improvement. You know? So we're okay, we can do better.
Okay.
Thanks. Was that layman enough?
That, yes, that helps a lot, thank you.
Ms. McDonough Souza?
Thank you. Can you just go into a little bit more detail as with regard to the assessment participation rates? The fact that high need students were slightly below the 95% participation for math and for science. Can you remind me who's choosing, like, is it staff at school that's choosing them to participate? Like, how does that work?
Mr. Brown, is it through the PGT process?
Well, all students participate in some test. There's an alternative assessment that a very small percentage of students are allowed to participate in. So those are students with the most significant disabilities and delays who participate in the alternative assessment. And there is very stringent criteria that the school team needs to demonstrate to request that a student participate in the alternative assessment and get approval from the State Department of Ed for that. So the only reason our numbers would be low would be if students' parents choose not to let them participate, or if they're absent on the days that the tests are given. We don't say that student's not going to take a test. Everyone must take either the regular or the alternative assessment.
Okay, so
We don't excuse anyone from the test.
Okay, so the alternative assessment is included in these numbers as
Yeah.
well? Oh, okay. Okay, so it's not like by virtue of the fact of like how many like what our students' disabilities are, like you might not like get to the 95% because a certain number just they're not able to take any assessment at all. Like you can't really, that's a little confusing to me, but.
Yes, but it's logical.
Okay.
You might think, right, you would think that some students wouldn't be able to sit and take the test.
Right.
That's why the state put in place this alternative assessment tool. And a lot of that is based on teacher observation to give a ranking to the student rather than having the student do a pencil and paper task.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
There was I think my first year here in Milford where our participation rate was in danger because we had, for some reason, one of our middle schools, they kind of went through the parent mill that we're not letting our kids take the SBA. We're not gonna do this Common Core thing. Remember those days? So that also sometimes is a factor that some parents are saying, my kid's not taking the test.
Right, okay, all right, thank you.
Mr. Fowler, did you have a question?
No, I was saying, yeah.
Mr. DeYoung?
Thank you. Dr. Kutai, I know we haven't had this report in a couple of years, but, or this detail, but each year, I think it's important to just remind us what constitutes a high needs student.
Yes,
I'm not sure if you said that at the beginning.
I did. Economically, economic challenging background, sorry. I'm failing to come up with that word, multilingual or disability.
Okay. Can you go into detail on what the assessment looks like to determine the growth rate? And, you know, why we might be seeing lower numbers, especially because our performance or our achievement seems strong. I'm curious as to why our growth might not be quite as strong.
Well, the ELA and math, district-wide, that's primarily based on SBA scores. It is based on a vertical scale, like I explained, so you can end up statistically being able to compare a third grader's score to his or her score to fourth grade, right? So there's growth there. We'd have to dig into an analysis of where are our kids not demonstrating growth, and that would be kid by kid, based on sort of an item analysis coming out of SBA.
Okay.
I will say that I feel like we're already being responsive in that we have revised curriculum and revised curricular experiences under high quality instruction in our grades, which are now more easily able to be implemented post-COVID.
Okay.
So growth analysis, I think, is something that is part of what we're engaging in now, particularly since, and you'll hear about this in a little bit, that we have a data system up and running this year where we can track how kids are doing in September compared to January compared to now.
Okay.
So rather than waiting for an SBA score that comes once a year, so remember that part too, right?
Right.
It's this 1 3-day assessment for kiddos.
Mm-hmm.
That we have opportunities that are to track kids more meaningfully over time.
Okay. I think that's really positive, and it's very, you know, I think you've talked about this in the past. It's very difficult to track that growth of kids, right? Because it's so up and down and all over the place. The other question I had for you is, I'm not sure if it plays out in these numbers, but there's a lot of, from what I understand, a lot of mental health issues with students, in particular, taking tests at this point. You sort of alluded to it because they're coming out of masks and that type of thing, but just the overall sense of nervousness and uneasiness, especially with kids that might not have taken tests in the past. So,
Yeah.
Do you think that's impacted these numbers at all, or?
I can't say it. I don't know that I'm a recipient of those narratives. At least I wasn't last year. We're entering into assessment season. So SBA is coming on board and SAT and AP are all coming. So I may have opportunity for live data coming soon.
Okay.
I think all of last spring was just stressful.
Right. Yeah.
And there were some, if you remember, not everybody was excited to come out of a mask.
Right. Yeah.
Like, we had families, we had kids, they were scared. And that was the environment that these numbers are living in. So I don't want by any means to make an excuse, but I just don't want us to forget the background of where these numbers are living.
Yeah, I agree. Okay, thanks.
Ms. Petrowski?
Can I just ask for a little clarification, again, between the academic achievement and the academic growth? When I look at 1A on the academic achievement, I see that we earned 90.5 points. When I go to the academic growth, our points earned are slightly less. Is that something that we should recognize as, oh yeah, that's reasonable because there's a lesser room for growth?
In ELA, I would make that connection.
Okay.
Ms. Petrowski. I don't know that I could use the same possibly for our high need students. You know, those indices are smaller in number. Albeit, you know, we should not be proud of those numbers. Those are pretty good numbers. They're above state average. But I think the higher that number, the 90.5,
Right.
that logic you just put out would make sense with 2A.
Okay, so you could say the more we are above on the actual achievement, the academic growth may reflect a lesser opportunity for growth.
Yes, it may.
Okay, thank you.
Ms. Doyle?
Just one clarification point, I think it fits with Ms. Petrowski's question. Because this number is representative of the entire district, all through,
Yeah.
starting in third grade.
Mhm.
So this comes back to the earlier question is, I'm guessing, but I can't be sure, that there's differences between the 3 to 8th grade, the high school students, in terms of gaps in achievements. We're looking at the whole broad picture of the district.
Yep.
But is there a difference between elementary school, middle school versus high school in terms of achievement and online hitting the assessments?
Oh, yeah, yeah. I mean, that's our internal work of taking a
Right.
look at how is each school doing.
Mm-hmm.
You know, even within elementary, you have 8 elementary all performing at different levels. So, and that's why I can't explain to you statistically how this works. And I think you guys have had the state expert come in and talk about the assessments, but they create standard measures on, and there are 3 very different assessments: the SBA, the SAT, and the CTAA. And they're creating some way of representing that as a district performance index, so.
Can you connect this for me in terms of curriculum development in that space of how that's going to be kind of, if you're looking at 8 elementary schools, that there are differences between A, B, and C, how does the curriculum reflect that to achieve better conclusive results?
Well,
But-
curriculum needs to be standardized and demonstrates what grade level expectations are. So the implementation of curriculum through instructional practice is likely where you'll start to see the impact on these scores, right? So we do take how are we doing on these assessments and ask ourselves, so are there any gaps in what we expect students to know and be able to do? That's not the only question, though. It's also, is there an implementation problem? That it may be in the curriculum, but somehow between the curriculum and the teacher and the kid, right, the instructional core is what we call that, there may be, you know, something amiss there. So opportunities for professional learning, opportunities for additional progress monitoring tools, opportunities to review the curriculum, make sure it's better aligned with the assessment. So the assessment's based on state and national standards. Our curriculum is based on state and national standards. So the tighter that alignment, the more likely better performance. But with that said, I am never in the business of teaching to the test.
Right.
And with SBA, that's harder to do than the CMT days.
Mhm.
CMT days, there was just like kill and drill on standard number 3 in literacy, you know, making connections or something, right? Was that it? Yeah, see? Like you don't forget some things. And I remember every year teachers teaching to that standard because it was the lowest on the test. And every year we're teaching to that test. And I don't ever want us to be in that business.
Okay. So what I think you're saying is that the curriculum work and the background work and the on-the-ground work will be reflected in time as we do more work and continue the progress in those areas, in these test numbers that comes forward in there.
Yeah, my leadership theory is focus on the right stuff.
And
Solid curriculum, high instructional practices, progress monitor the kiddos, provide them an environment, not just the kids, but the staff, conditions and environment to thrive, and this stuff takes care of itself.
Great, thank you.
Other questions? We will move on to the next piece of
More
this.
riveting data. Okay, so I am not reading all of this to you. Yes, please pass it out. Thanks, Pam. There are 8 pages of data. But there are a couple things I want to bring to your attention. So that's how we're going to roll right now. I'm not going to go to every single section. I'm just going to bring your attention to some of them. Okay, so let's just take a look at enrollment for a moment, and not that we're going to dive into, oh, look, we have fewer kids. We know that. But I've had a little bit of fun in the last week, if you want to call it fun. I dove into a 10 and 20-year look back to our school system, and so I'll share a couple of those data points with you this evening, including during the coaching presentation. But if you take a look at the breakdown of our enrollment, when it comes to race ethnicity, you will see that our current population is 68.5% white, and that would leave us at 31.5% not white. But I want to take us back in time a little bit. So if you have a pencil, you may want to jot these numbers down. In 2001-2, so it's 20 years from this report, 21-22, okay? 20 years ago, our school system was 89.7% white, therefore 10.3% non-white. I went to 11-12, which was 10 years ago from this report. Our school system, according to state reporting, was 80.9% white, and therefore 19.1% not white. Today, we are 68.5% white. We are increasingly, over 20 years, becoming much, much, much more diverse. We went from 10% 20 years ago to 31% non-white students. Those are data points we have to put in front of us as we move forward in what you were just talking about, Ms. Doyle, curriculum, instruction, all of that, okay? I also want to bring your attention to the percentage of students who qualify for free and reduced lunch. In 20 years ago, in 01, 02, now the line, I'm going to bring your attention to this year's line. It's still on page 1, still that same chart, and it's just below the race ethnicity breakdown, and it reads eligible for free or reduced price meals. The district is 27.4. So 20 years ago in 1-2, it was 14.2%. 10 years ago, it was 20.7%. And in 21-22, the state is reporting 27.4%. So over 20 years, we've doubled that number. I just have to wonder if that free and reduced number will grow exponentially after, based on this year's reporting, so we'll see till next year. So I think understanding holistically as a board, as an administration, that our families, our young people, our student body is changing. And it would behoove us to know that as a city, actually, as well, okay?
Mhm.
So we have some work to do under chronic absenteeism and suspension expulsion. We are working with Ms. Alcampora to dive into those numbers, as I mentioned earlier. We have opportunity, and I'm worried because I think this expulsion number is going to exponentially change this year. We have had a record number of student incidents that actually aligns with one of our budget line items tonight. Everything's kind of related tonight, isn't it? So we have room for growth. We have a 4.5% rate of suspension expulsion. We'd really like to get that number down, but I'm worried that our students are struggling and demonstrating some behaviors that just are not in line with board policy and what we expect of young people. So that's an area for us to dive into and consider other interventions and support systems. On the second page, again, I'm not going to go to every single category. The college and career readiness courses during high school is a strength of ours. We see young people taking advantage of that and doing well. I think there's always a goal to increase the percent of time that students with disabilities spend with non-disabled peers. So we're looking each year to increase that, and that's in the bottom right corner of page 2. We're right there below the state average on that. I'll bring your attention to page 3, top left corner. If you do a year-by-year analysis, you will see that this rate of identification is growing across the state and here in Milford as well. I remember the days when I worked in another district and we were happy with an 11 to 12% identification rate, and here we are looking at 16%. And I think, Mr. Brown, I know the state average here says 16.3. I think this year it's even grown from there though, right?
It's approaching 17%
Okay.
for this year, yeah.
So-
I think it might be 17.1.
Okay, I thought it had already broken the 17
Yep.
number. I believe, agree or disagree, that we're gonna be hitting that number if we haven't already.
We, over the last 20 years, we've been trending in lockstep with the state average.
That you'll see on this page, expenditures, you'll also see a breakdown on the bottom left, the percent of budget spent on special education. That is right in line with the state average. On page 4, we have a breakdown of how our students do based on demographics, on district performance index, which is based on those assessments we just talked about. Again, here are opportunities for to closing achievement gaps in our school system. We are working with Ms. Alcampora and supervisors and school leaders to take a look at equity and access, experiences, and outcomes. Those are that's our three-pronged approach to equity, particularly when it comes to our young people's experiences and outcomes in our system. So more to come on that as we move forward. In the bottom right corner is a breakdown of that physical fitness test I was talking about. You'll see how it goes from 4th to 6th to 8th to high school, and how gratefully we do better as the years progress. On page 5, you'll see that our district just scores very high at 94.4% in the bottom left of 11th and 12th graders demonstrating post-secondary readiness. And a number that really, really surprised me is persistence, which is measured right next to it on the right, that the class of 21, 75.1% of students attended college with a persistency rate of 83.3, meaning actually kids stayed for another year beyond freshman year. And these are Milford graduates. Page 6 is a repeat of the next generation accountability system. We just went through all those indicators with you. And then pages 7 and 8 are narratives, which I'll let you read. It is required that every year we provide the state narrative on what our improvement plans are, what our efforts are to reduce racial, ethnic, and economic isolation, and our efforts in equitably allocating resources among all of our 14 schools. Happy to take questions from that.
The college entrance and persistence. So that, the entrance just, it doesn't reflect whether kids actually got into college, correct? It's just the number of kids that actually attended.
Yeah.
Questions? Mr. DeYoung?
Thank you. I don't know if you intended to swamp us with data tonight, but success. The suspension and expulsion number that you pointed to, do we have that broken down by levels?
We have it in our system, yeah, but
Okay.
not on this report.
No, I know not on this report. Is there a dramatic increase as you get to middle school, high school? Where does the, or is it not significant enough?
It is primarily a function of secondary education.
Okay, all right. All right, that was it, thank you.
Ms. Doyle?
Can you define truant, or what would be truant under the state statute on the first
Do I have
page?
that answer, Mr. Brown? Do you have that answer?
It's,
Thank you.
truant, being truant is being absent 4 days out of 20.
And that,
That would probably should be true, to be classified as truant.
Okay, because it's fairly high for last year, and I mean, pretty high. Last year, we also had that COVID, a lot more students were going out for periods of time before if they need to isolate. So is this part of the same reach out to identify students who are more chronically absent and kind of moving that number down?
Yes, so currently we're doing quite a bit for students who are chronically absent or truant, depending on what way we're using. We have quite a bit of contact with the home. Our social workers and other staff will make home visits. Our school resource officers will make home visits in a friendly way, and to make efforts to get the students to come into school. There's a broad range of reasons why students are truant. It's not all for the same reason. And it's typically different types of family struggles, or in large part, we see a lot of students with severe anxiety who don't come to school. So it's a mix of many different reasons.
So, in the number, is it 1,598 individual students who at least once during the year not identified, but could be categorized as truant? So 1 month they could have missed 4 days in 20 days. And then multiple times they did it over the course of the year?
Yeah, I'm not exactly sure on how those numbers are calculated.
It's okay.
There's a rather complex formula that the state uses to determine number of days present and numbers of days absent, and I'd have to refresh on how they calculate that number.
Okay.
Mr. Giancola may have an answer.
I think it's per kid.
Okay,
You know, like, if you hit it 3 times throughout the year, you're only counting once.
got it. That's what I figured as much. And so it kind of goes in line what we discussed in the earlier section about mental health issues and more of these, that there's a lot of students struggling within the district.
If I could piggyback on that, but it could also just be a student that just got really sick and had a really bad case of the flu, who's out for 5 days, right?
Yeah.
And-
Especially in
Unfortunately.
context of last year.
Correct, yeah.
So.
Sure.
And this
It would be
year.
interesting, and this
Yeah.
year.
Yeah, right. I mean, not just COVID, but you all likely have also personally, people are just getting sick because we're not masked anymore.
Mhm.
So some of these numbers may not improve this year. Just laying the groundwork in case that happens next year. Just in case.
And I have another question going back to the college entrance and persistence. I know we've spent a decent amount of time talking about various diversity, equity, inclusion, and all parts of it, and we don't, I think when we look at the numbers of expulsions of male students, and then this 20% gap between the female and male students who are entering college, and I can't tell if, I'm assuming it doesn't include community college because it's part of the National Clearinghouse and things like that. I know there's different opportunities, but it seems like the male students are entering college less and staying less. In how long-term?
According to the data point in front of you, that would be accurate.
Okay.
But
We don't have any, like,
That's a national trend.
right, I know it's a national trend, and so I know we've spent some time talking about various other groups that we've tried to address. How are we are we trying to channel students to other means?
So I'm glad you mentioned that. Like, I'm not gonna force kids into college.
Right.
And I know that's like an indicator of success for school systems, but I'd rather a kid go to a technical school, leave here with some work-based certified skill sets where they can go right into the workforce and be successful and not rack up a bunch of debt after 4 years and not know what they're doing. Like, that's just not my goal, to increase four-year college entrance. For kids who want to, yes, but, so, I'm gonna say, hopefully one day they'll add, and kids that went into the workforce and started making 100,000 after 2 years, like, right?
No,
Being a plumber or a HVAC guy, because there are none of them around.
Right.
So,
I think that's kind of points to our goal of continuing these other pathways of careers and
Yeah.
technical education that we need to continue and implement within our school district, because it's clear that male students are not going to college, to four-year college at the same rate as female students. And so we have to provide for all students, not just those students. And I think that's important data to see. But I would like to see the other half of the data if they gave it to us, but they obviously don't.
well, we hope to, I just had a meeting today on Milford Measures. One of the things we hope to capture are these career paths. So how many kids start in a career path in 7th grade, persist in 1 or 2, what that means for what they do post us. So that measure may not be something we quickly capture, but it's something we have to start capturing in 7th grade. If a kid is expressing interest in 7th grade in X, Y, and Z, and he experiments with it throughout our system, what do they do with that then in 12th? Like, was there any connection? And I think that's a data point worth capturing over the next few years.
Sounds good. Thank you.
Other questions? Ms. Boynton?
So for the record, these numbers I'm much more comfortable with than the other ones. And actually, I'm really interested in spending a little bit more time with them, because I do think that they tell a really interesting story about our school district. And I hope that we have the opportunity, if we have any more questions at a future time after being able to digest, that we can come back and ask you. But I'm just wondering if you could briefly touch on page 2, the section on educators by race, ethnicity. You know, our population of students is becoming so much more diverse. I'm wondering if you could just give us an overview on what we are doing to ensure that our educators are more diverse and we have more of them.
Well, we suffer from what the state is experiencing. But Connecticut does not have a lot of educators of color, and the majority of our educators of color actually teach in cities. And under Ms. Capazzo's leadership, we've actually engaged in a teacher residency program where we onboarded 2 individuals of color this year, and through for a fee, that person, those 2 individuals are spending the year with us. And at the end of the year, they will be certified teachers, and the deal is we offer them a job and they stay with us. Now, unfortunately, one of the individuals did not make the program, didn't see it through. So we hope to have one still, okay? Individual, and that's a start. We've also talked about our talent management and development approach to Ms. Capazzo going out and actively recruiting, as opposed to just waiting for people to apply to us, and getting out there and going to universities where there may be higher percentage of individuals of color graduating for from their teacher prep program. So I think we have to go out and find them. But we also have to be a system that that has a climate and culture where these individuals will feel like they belong. And we have work to do in that as a system. So this is an area of need. I even wrote here in pencil, area of need. And we need a strategy on that I'm hoping in our newly revamped HR department, or TMD, Talent Management Development, that we can be more intentional about this.
I hope so too. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much for this report. We still have instructional coaching update, so
We
we can
do.
move on to that, right?
You okay with that?
Yep.
I'm gonna stand though and do that part. Where was it? our team here tonight. Thank you for allowing us to add this to the agenda. We felt it was really important to start talking about coaching because everybody else is talking about coaching in the city of Milford. So we thought we should. Kidding, not kidding, right? I feel like I have to open up by saying that this is, instructional coaching is a key leadership move for me. I'm absolutely transparent with this board and our community and our staff about what the key levers are to improvement. We have a vision of the learner. We have invested in the developmental relationships framework. We have a model for high quality instruction. We believe in little L leaders or developing leaders in every single classroom to empower teachers to grow themselves and one another. And a key part to our growth and development in Milford Public Schools is instructional coaching. And so while I want to take the credit for that, I can't. Because the system already had the backing and the data to support this, and the system already had coaches in schools. We just took what was there and grew it. And we made a pivot, which we're going to explain tonight, on investing more in coaching rather than intervention. And intervention to me meaning waiting for students to fail and then whoo, gotta get in there, as opposed to getting ahead, building capacity, working directly with kids that need us in a strategic leadership way. But let's go back in time, since we've already done a little bit of that this evening, okay? I'm gonna take us back to 2013 for a minute. How many of you were on the board at that time? Ms. Glennon? Okay. So Ms. Glennon will remember, and maybe there were some people here during this time, right? In 2013, at the time, the District Management Council, today known as District Management Group, came and conducted a review of the school district, particularly with the lens on special education opportunities, meaning what's going well in the world of special education and where are the opportunities for growth. I should warn you, there are lots of slides with lots of words. We've broken every PowerPoint rule tonight in this presentation, but we felt like we had to because there's so much information to share, okay? And we will at times be reading to you from the slide, another no-no. Now here's one of those times. What did DMC say? They said to us, Milford Public Schools, you need to develop a clear and consistent vision for providing literacy instruction at the elementary level based on best practices. That's 10 years ago. 10 years ago, we were told you need to clarify the role of regular education teachers to take the primary responsibility, the delivery of core reading instruction to all students, including those with mild to moderate disabilities. Underscore regular education teachers taking primary responsibility. 10 years ago, we were told kids should spend extra time on reading, we need to provide extra time on reading with skilled teachers of reading using data to inform instruction. This is also a chart that was in the report from DMC. It does an analysis of the number of reading interventionists in the school system, the total number of elementary students, the total number of elementary students struggling in reading. I want to pause for a moment. Take a look at those two numbers. 3,000 kids at the elementary level, 1,000 kids struggling in reading. Did I hear a wow?
Yeah.
Not good wow.
Mm-mm.
13 years ago, 1/3 of our elementary kids below level. The student ratio per interventionist was 46 kids to each interventionist. So, the text comes directly from the report. Overall, there is one interventionist for every 46 kids. Given the existing number of reading staff, it's possible for each reading interventionist to reach all students who struggle. So, 24 interventionists rescuing 1,000 kids from their reading problems. That's what the report said we could do. To me, that's no way to improve student learning. Not by sending reading interventionists to turn the performance around of a third of our students. You know what they call that in undergrad school? It's not a student performance problem. It's a core instructional problem when you have 30% of your kids not on level. And I'm not pointing at teachers. I'm pointing at curriculum. I'm pointing at potentially not having an instructional model that was consistent across 251 classrooms. But let's move on, because there's more information here, okay? In 2017, there was a coherence capacity review conducted by the Connecticut Center for School Change. Also today, their name is changed. There's a theme here. They're known as the Partners for Educational Leadership. We currently work with partners, by the way, in other areas. If you've heard of Dr. Stevenson, and I work with the NIC, etc. The purpose of the study was to assess the degree to which MPS is approaching improvement in a coherent and aligned fashion and possesses the necessary capacity to achieve its improvement aims. Here are the findings. There are lots of areas of work being pursued with earnestness by people who are thoughtful, intentional, hardworking. That has not changed today. We still have teachers, we have leaders, we have coaches who work earnestly every day. But instructional priorities were not clear in 2017. That there was a degree of urgency towards system-wide improvement tied to raising achievement that was inconsistent. There seemed to be many improvement strategies, but how they connected was not clear. There's variation in degrees of trust existing in the system. Collaborative practices within and between buildings and departments were not always evident. Communication lines, beginning with the central office and across buildings, were sometimes ineffective and confusing. Milford professional learning opportunities appear vast, but there are questions regarding the transfer of professional learning into classroom practice. Emphasis, last bullet. A lot of PL. And Dr. Nobley is going to show you actually some research that shows how do you get theory into a classroom? It's not by sending more teachers out to a good PD. Yep.
Can I make a quick point? 2017, it was the year before Dr. Kutaya came. And one of the things that we heard from staff when we were putting together our profile of what do we want as superintendent was all surrounding this work, the coherence work, and teachers being very concerned that this work was going to go away with the new superintendent coming on board. So just want to make that clear.
Thank you, Ms. Bennett. 2019, the second year I was here now, we commissioned a literacy program review by a group called the Leading for Learning LLC. I'm going to do some reading to you from slides, okay? The review was done in the area of literacy, in that the program review, it was shared that less than 30% of our students were exited from intervention, and there was not a systemic plan for how students receive support or from whom. Hit pause. 2019 was a year that we had interventionists in our elementary schools. Some had 2, some had 2.5, some had 3. Did I get that right? 30% of kids in intervention exited. In order to exit, the child has to demonstrate a shrinking of the gap between grade level work and where they were. That means catching up to grade level. 30%. Now let's just say, let's use our 1,000 number from 2013. 300 kids got out of intervention, with 2 to 3 interventionists at each building. You catching on? To learn more about this finding, the district did extensive research on the lack of long-term impact of a remediation model, particularly in the area of foundational reading. That phrase should remind you of the Right to Read Act. Foundational reading is key to the Right to Read Act that is before us. The findings show that a model of acceleration, I want you to remember that word, and a model which prioritizes teacher capacity around instruction had longer lasting effects. Continued from the same report. Further, the review found that there's a need to brand coaching. What is it? How coaches help, what coaches do, what coaching is not. We started this work in 2019 and got interrupted in 2020. According to a teacher survey given in this program review, 53% of teachers indicated that they knew completely what resources to use with the curriculum. Pause. Half of our teachers knew what curriculum resources to use. That's not enough. During the classroom visits, there was little evidence that teachers are given implementation resources to match the 2016 revision for grades K-5. Pause. There was curriculum revision and they weren't given the resources to do it. Thank you, board, for over and over during my tenure investing in classroom libraries and investing in curriculum revision. It is possible that students are getting different variations of the curriculum in different schools and even different classrooms in a grade level. Pause. One of the things you told me, the hiring board told me, sorry, not you specifically, but the hiring board told me that there's variation, particularly among the 8 elementary, in what kids have access to do as far as experience is concerned. And we wanted to make that more consistent. This review picked up on that. A common request in school after school was for the district to provide related implementation resources to match curriculum revisions. All right, let's take a moment to consume this chart, okay? I'm going to read the sidebar and then we're going to look into the numbers. In a survey, teachers are asked to assess their capacity and comfort in delivering components of a comprehensive core literacy program. You will see the results from the teacher survey. The results highlighted are to illustrate what percentage of staff feel a strong sense of understanding and implementation, as well as percentage of teachers who feel they are unsuccessful implementing the component. The remaining responses fall in the good capacity range. The bold-faced items are areas that staff have indicated need more clarity. Very important point. A point to note is that phonemic awareness and phonics were listed on this survey for teachers to respond to.
We're not listed.
We're not. No.
We're not listed.
Thank you. We're not listed on the survey for teachers to respond to. Weak phonemic awareness is one of the key signs of dyslexia. Let's go into the chart for a minute. At best, 66, 2/3 of our staff at the elementary level feel strongly that they could implement core areas of literacy instruction. The list includes the core areas of reading. At best, 66% of our staff felt good about it, felt strong about it. That's not an indication of our staff's capacity. Those numbers point at the system, at the district support of developing teachers. Put your eyes on word study for a minute. Word study is where teachers would be thinking phonics and phonemic awareness. Foundational skills to reading. Now I'm going to have you go back to the DMC report in your mind. If this is the status of how teachers are thinking about instructional practice, is it any wonder that 30% of our kids were in intervention? We have to get to the core of instruction, not waiting for kids to fail. So, part of this next slide, some of you saw at a presentation, budget presentation I made in 2019. I've added 2 charts. This is going to be a little bit of history in visual format. As I told you last week, I've been doing a little bit of history, and I went back 10 years and 20 years, okay? These are CMT results from 2001. So around the 60s, right? 60s to 70s, 20 years ago. This is 2011. 10 years later, maybe we made some improvement in 6th grade reading. I'm going to do that again for you. Not much change over 10 years. Same test, CMT, okay? So we can call this consistent, or we can call this something less positive, right? Let's go down to a different test. Percentage of exams that scored, this is AP, kids that scored 3 or higher from 2014 to 19. Not much change over 5 years. Here's another one. Percentage of exams, of students that scored 4 or higher from 14 to 19. Not much change. Would you call that consistent? Here's SAT, 17, 18, 19. Percentages, grade 11 students at or above goal in SAT math. Consistent. SAT, English Language Arts, 11th graders, 3 years. Consistent. SBA, English Language Arts, 17, 18, 19. And math. Am I making my point? We have been consistent for 20 years. We want progress, but we don't want change. And if we keep doing the same thing over and over, the next superintendent will be standing before you in 10 years saying, we have consistent results. I am trying to break that pattern. And the way we're trying to do it is we're going all the way to elementary school first. We've written curriculum. We have a model for high quality instruction. Ms. Mara and her team have been providing professional learning through coaches, direct instruction to some kids. But it's not an intervention model. It's a different model. And it's changed for some people. It's still working with kids, but it's also working with teachers, through teachers, for kids. I'm going to give you a little bit more tonight about that. So over the years, this is the kind of support we've had in Milford Public Schools. In the area of reading, we've had everything called a reading teacher, reading interventionist, remedial reading teacher, reading specialist, literacy coach. I asked Andrea Giantasio, who started teaching at Orchard Hills 30 years ago, do you remember any reading support teachers? Oh yeah, there was a reading teacher. So I have documented proof, 30 years ago, that there was a reading teacher in the system. We've had literacy coaches too. We've had a math coach at the elementary, not a math interventionist. And in 2021, we shifted all of our support without adding any FTEs, using the FTEs we have to shift to an instructional coach model. So, the district made a shift in spring of 21 to invest more directly into building teacher capacity through instructional coaching. The role of instructional coaches is to work with teachers on improving instructional practice while deepening content knowledge to ultimately increase student outcomes. Coaches also provide direct support to students. Interventionists did not build teacher capacity. They only worked with kids. And we didn't see the data. We didn't see the results of that 24 FTE investment in 2013. I'm pretty sure, which I didn't do this homework, but I'm pretty sure we had more than 24 interventionists when we made this shift, but 27. 27 FTEs under the title of Reading Teacher Interventionist. And at the time of that program review, 30% of kids were exiting. All right, so those numbers are something for us to consider. 27 FTEs, 30% exiting. We decided to make a shift. More about the shift.
Thank you and good evening. So just to continue to talk a little bit, I know Dr. Kataya alluded to this, so this is just a slide that highlights some of the research that's been replicated time and time again on the effectiveness of coaching, instructional coaching in particular, compared to other forms of professional learning. So as you can see, typically go to a PD, learn about some teaching thing. If you look at the last column, impact to practice, right? Actual instruction that gets to kids to increase learning. There's a 0% impact to practice. Theory, where the instructor might model something in the room but no kids, nothing. Theory, modeling, and then you try, role play it, minimal. But when you combine all those things and then you add the support of instructional coaching or a coach there in the moment, side by side with the teacher, working with adult and children as we've talked about, you can see the impact of practice. So our theory, our model is to capitalize on that research and that understanding. I'm going to give you a moment. So one of the things we've talked about is the ineffectiveness of the remediation model. And a little bit about moving to this acceleration model, which I know we've spoken to the board about before. But just to give you a little reminder of the differences in what we're trying to do instead of remediating. So I'll give you a chance to read this. I won't read it out loud, and then I'll highlight a few points. So there's some things in bold that I would like to draw your attention to, and definitely are points to think about. If we go with the typical approach of remediation, of intervention, we're not going to be catching kids up, and we're only going to be compounding the problem. This goes beyond program reviews and things that were done in Milford, but the national level. The idea of meeting students where they are, although it seems logical, right, is actually counterintuitive, because what we're doing is we are denying kids access to grade level content and opportunity. I like to equate it to we're basically digging one hole to fill the other. So I'm taking the kid out of second grade reading instruction or math instruction to catch them up on something they might not, some unfinished learning they have from kindergarten or first grade. That might work, but now they have a hole in second grade. And now I have to fill that hole. But when am I going to do that? Third grade, fourth grade, fifth grade? So it's a tough process to get ahead in. So that's one thing to keep in mind. The other idea is that, and this particularly talks about coming out of COVID and looking at unfinished learning from that, but even more in general, doubling down on the current strategies for catching students up will only widen opportunity and achievement gaps. We've had some talk tonight about access and equity, and I would say that a remediation model, an intervention model, is an inequitable practice. We're denying kids access to grade level content. We're denying them the opportunity to get the same access to high level instruction that their peers are. We need to change and shift our thinking on that. And we actually need to be putting kids on a fast track to grade level work with the appropriate supports, not denying them. So again, those are some of the things. And as we've talked about, pulling kids down the hall in a room to do work that's 2 or 3 years below grade level isn't going to do that. And we have this research and much more like it coming out that shows that exact same thing. So again, this is just a graphic to highlight what happens, right? So we might start with a small gap, right, in grade 2, and then we say, okay, we'll remediate, we'll try to catch kids up, we'll meet them where they are, we'll fill in the gap. But again, problem is, and they miss grade 2. Now they're behind there and more. And then you see that widen in 7th. And then we get kids getting into high school and you see the kinds of inequitable access to higher level coursework and other things that are affected. So we need to do something different because this cycle isn't working. So and I know we've talked about acceleration before, but just some key points of what does that actually mean then, okay? So if we're not remediating, we're not intervening, doing an intervention model, what are we doing? So one of the things that we do in our work is prioritize grade level and curricular content in each grade to say yes, all the standards are important in 3rd grade or 4th grade, but Common Core does highlight what are those key content standards and things that are really important in each grade level. So we need to make sure that we're spending the most time in our curriculum on those things and giving kids access to those things. So that's something that we do. Again, giving kids access to high quality tasks, every kid. So again, back, I don't know, when I was teaching a while ago, we used to have 3 different versions of the task, right? You'd give one task to the quote unquote lower kids and one to the medium kids and then one to the high kids. That's not what we mean anymore. Everyone gets the same task. What we differentiate on, what we scaffold is the entry point for each kid on that task. Again, we've talked about this, I know, numerous times with the board, our approach to formative assessment, using those strategies to elicit evidence of potential unfinished learning and overall student progress. So we have some better systems in place to do that and respond in a more timely fashion. This is a big one. So when do you address the unfinished learning, right? When do you help kids make connections to that grade level work? In the moment in core instruction, not walk down the hall. So math example, if I have a child who has some unfinished learning with place value, they're in 4th and 5th grade, I might use the opportunity when we're working on multi-digit multiplication and division to also do some work with that child on that place value understanding, while still moving them forward in the grade level. In reading, if I have a child that might have some decoding issues, so what I might do if we're working on, I still want to give them access to authentic high-level, grade-level texts, because I still want to work on their comprehension, so maybe they'll listen to the text, or maybe it's a read aloud. I'm not denying them access to that because they have a decoding issue. I'll work on that during a strategy group. So that's kind of the approach, a couple of kind of concrete examples that we're getting at. And then, again, we need to prioritize, and this obviously goes right down to our model for high quality instruction, which we know the board is of course well versed in. We need to prioritize instructional strategies that privilege student thinking. Kids aren't thinking, they are not learning. And what we find in the intervention model and the remedial model is that the teacher's working very, very hard, no doubt about that. But oftentimes it's the child is not, right? And it's more of a memorization, drill and kill, low level type work. Again, back to the access issue. And that, of course, is not gonna help any kid, but particularly kids who already have unfinished learning. It doesn't really make any sense to deny them access to those higher level opportunities. And then finally, you can't do this work alone as a teacher, as we'll talk more about. It would be unfair to ask. So we have a tremendous amount of supports in Milford Public Schools to support both students and teachers in doing this work, including coaches, which are pivotal in partnering with teachers in this work. And then finally, before I hand it over to Smorrow, this is just a quick table that shows our class sizes at the elementary level. And the only reason we bring this up is to just show that we have healthy class sizes in terms of being conducive for this acceleration model, right? There are our class sizes are not at a point where we wouldn't be able, a teacher wouldn't be able to meet the needs of all the students within core content, specifically in partnership with an instructional coach. So we have this here just to illustrate that we actually have the structure for that within our class sizes right now because of your support in that work. And I will hand it over.
So continuing with the history walk tonight, I'm going to take you through a little bit of our instructional coaching journey. And I'm actually going to start before the first bullet point. So although it's small and hard to read, the first date on there is 2021, but I'd actually like to take you back to 2019. As Dr. Kataya shared in the literacy findings, there was a need to rebrand coaching. And in fact, we started that work January 8th of 2020. Of course, a few short months later, that work was halted to a stop. It was then that we came back together, and it was the fall of 2021 that we rebranded instructional coaches. You may remember that we have 4 instructional coaches at every single one of our elementary schools. As the board talked about before, or Dr. Kataya talked about before, we know coherence is really important. So it was important for us to have a consistent model of instruction at all 8 elementary schools. The primary role of the instructional coach is to support students and build teacher capacity around high-quality instructional practices. In 2022, we worked on a vision and a model for coaching. We also were responding to our district data. So you'll remember, as Dr. Kataya talked about earlier, we were just coming out of COVID. And in Milford, we noticed that some of our grade levels had been hit harder than others. So we were able to use our instructional coaches to dive right into those grade levels and be responsive in the moment. Further in 2022, we worked on developing best practices in coaching. We talked specifically about side-by-side coaching and how important it was to have a thought partner in the moment who could see what a student was doing and guide your practice. We then talked about the importance of coaching and the right to read legislation. As you'll remember, I stood before this board several months ago and talked about some of the rebranding we are doing in foundational literacy. When we wrote that 180-page waiver, coaches were a key factor in moving these changes in foundational reading ahead. Not only will they support curriculum changes, but they'll also help grow teacher capacity around students and around how we teach foundational reading in this shifted culture. We're currently looking at coaching in action. We've moved towards small cycles of continuous improvement for both adults and students. We think it's really important to break the idea of a traditional 6-week cycle where a student may not make growth and instead think about how we're moving the student, as Dr. Nobley said, in an accelerated fashion through the curriculum towards grade level standards. We also recently had the Performance Matters data system updated. Because of that, we are now able to look more intentionally at our own Milford Public Schools data and look for trends across the district. Our coaches have developed a call to action and they are beginning to develop a coaching framework. They will continue to build routines around data as well as how all students' needs are being met. And finally, coaches are working with their leaderships to talk about student achievement. So the report you had earlier, as Dr. Kataya mentioned, we are starting at the elementary level to talk about student achievement. We don't want any surprises on the SBA. We know that we have work to do, particularly in the area of foundational literacy. So we want to have checkpoints all the way along so we make sure that we know where all of our students are. One of the things we are most proud of is that those teachers who are really open to coaching and have an instructional coach, in fact we have some of them here tonight, we're seeing that success and that increased student outcome when teachers are open to coaches coming in their room. On the next slide, I'm going to give you a little bit of a glimpse. This is one of our literacy assessments. It was given in February, and this is one of our Milford Public Schools. You'll notice the green and yellow are below level. The red and yellow are below level. The green and blue would be median level and exceeding level. And the important part to notice here is that now with the updated data platform, we're able to disaggregate our data and we're intentionally able to make sure we're meeting all students' needs. We also are able to look at our data and see where instructional coaching is at its finest. One of the things we are very proud to say is that when we see increased teacher capacity because they've worked with a coach, we're already seeing increased student outcomes. Finally, we thought it was important for you to hear from some voices other than ours tonight. So we have a cadre of teachers and coaches who are going to share some of their experiences with you around instructional coaches. So I'm going to ask Meg Del Monte to come up first. Meg is currently an instructional coach at Pumpkin Delight. She has a phenomenal history in the district, which she will tell you a little bit about, and she's going to share some of her ahas around instructional coaches.
I do much better in front of kids, so I apologize now. My name is Megan Belmonte, and I've been in the district for 16 years, having taught kindergarten for 11 and a half years before leaving the classroom to become a reading interventionist. As a reading interventionist, my caseload ranged from 20 to 30 kids each year, depending on the need. We would bring the most developing kids to our classroom and work our magic for 30 minutes 5 times a week. The kids would then go back to the classroom where the teachers really had no idea what we were doing with them. I remember having conversations with teachers about students in intervention, and so often they would say, we don't see them doing that in our classroom. They're struggling while in the classroom. Why was the magic only working in my classroom but not the teachers? In 2021, as the district moved away from the interventionist, I applied for the coach position. I must admit that I was really worried about this. We had just come out of COVID and we knew kids were behind. How is this going to work? Is this the best decision? Then I began to have aha moments. My first aha moment was when Beth and I sat down to do some side-by-side research and development on what could be an acceleration model. We worked with 3 4th grade boys that had been behind and had been in intervention since kindergarten. We gave them grade level texts and listened as they read. Boy, were we surprised. They did much better than I had anticipated, having known these boys fairly well for the past 3 years. We really analyzed their errors and started to have conversations about, while each error is important, some were more important than others. And when we started to look at them differently, we were really able to pinpoint their needs. After that, we met with their teachers, discussed our findings, and made a plan for the students. As a coach, I used a gradual release model. I went in to model a small group for 2 weeks while the teacher watched me. Week 3, the teacher and I taught the group side by side, and week 4, the teacher took over the group while I watched. How powerful it was for the teacher to take ownership and know exactly what to do and how to meet the needs of her students instead of me taking the group down the hall to work my magic. That was last year, and I'm happy to say that the 3 boys are currently still on grade level. My next aha moment was when I participated in the district's lifting HQI meeting last year. We were discussing the learning pit and productive struggle. And as I was listening to how we need to make sure students struggle and how we can't over scaffold to them, build the bridge over the learning pit, I sat there red in the face. How often did I handhold the students in intervention and build the bridge for them? No wonder why the classroom teachers were saying, we don't see what you see when they're with you in the intervention. But that was my job, right? These were the most struggling kids, and my job was to help them. I started to realize I didn't really help them at all. That my 30 minutes of hand-holding with no support in the classroom hadn't helped. No wonder why we saw kids enter intervention in kindergarten, and most of them were still in intervention in 5th grade. Something was broken with our system. As a coach, I had the ability to build teacher capacity around literacy skills. I worked side by side with teachers, analyze data, and think about what students need. We worked together to plan out lessons, do side by side teaching, often using that gradual release model. The difference? The kids are in the classroom and have opportunities throughout the day to put these strategies into practice. The teacher knows what all their students are working on and can tap into that during all parts of the literacy block. Teachers are understanding the importance of these foundational skills, the why behind why we are teaching. They are gaining knowledge of high leverage routines and are making shifts in their classroom that are bettering all their students. They are adding to their toolbox of strategies to help their most developing students. They are making decisions based on what they see from their students on a daily basis. No longer are teachers in the dark about what their students need and how to give it to them. Some of the teachers I worked with over the past 2 years have said, Meg, I've never seen them transfer these skills as much as they have been. They're even carrying it into their writing. The students aren't seeing their reading instruction as something separate than what is being done in their classroom because they aren't leaving it. They have access to a teacher who knows how to support them and can help them throughout the day. The routines and tools they use in small group are the same that they do in whole group instruction, just tailored to the skill they need. The students aren't missing access to grade level curriculum. They are receiving that exposure that they all need. I've already seen the change in our current 2nd grade students. We had students entering 2nd grade as developing students. At the beginning of the year, myself and the other coach, along with the teachers, analyzed data and made a plan to meet the students' needs. We went into model what a small group consists of and how to support their needs throughout the day. The teachers have been continuing this work, and because of that, in the winter of 2023, we had 23% students developing, 13% meeting, and 63% exceeding our reading benchmark. I know that as we continue to build teacher capacity, the less developing students we will see. And I can't wait to see where our current kindergarten and first grades turn out.
I'm gonna ask Terry to come up next. Terry, again, is a wonderful instructional coach. She also happens to be at Pumpkin Delight. Terry has the unique perspective of being a former math coach when math coaches were the thing, and now the shift to instructional coach.
I thought you were gonna say I have the benefit of being old. Here I am. I've been here a long time, for 24 years. I've had a lot of hats that I've worn. I've been a reading specialist, I've been a classroom teacher, I've been a math coach, and now I'm an instructional coach. So I've seen a lot of teacher development happen in Milford, and I feel like a little bit in the history mode here. I'm kind of going back from my own point of view of how that's changed for me from that development perspective. When I started, professional development was delivered through district-wide programs. We'd come as a whole grade level or a whole district. We would listen to the expert about whatever it was we were finding out about how to be an expert in at that time. And then we'd go back and we'd pretty much do the same thing that we did last time. Any old people over here know what I'm talking about. I'm sure I learned something each time, but I don't think it made that great of an impact on any of my instructional practices. At some point, we stopped gathering as those large groups and we kind of stayed to our own schools. We met as a faculty, we did our professional development that way. But it was still something I might take a little extra out of, but I didn't really feel like it was meeting my personal needs. When the coaching model came to Milford, even before Dr. Kataya, because I've been here a long time, it was a little more personal. There were, I think, 4 math coaches for 8 schools. No literacy ones, there were literacy coaches, that's true. See, I don't really remember because we didn't really meet with them very often. There were a lot of teachers, not a lot of coaches, not a lot of time to develop with them. When we did meet with them, it was mostly as a grade level. Again, I'm sure they were helpful to me, but I didn't come away with really big changes in my instructional practice. Mostly they focused on the content, they talked about programs, they talked about how we could take the curriculum we have and deliver it to the students in front of us. Not a whole lot focused on me and where I am in my practice and how do I move forward. Now, coaching in Milford, as Meg very well said, is very personal. I can meet with a teacher, I can meet with a grade level of teachers, I can meet with a whole school. I can meet with a teacher every day in their room about the kids in front of them right there and figure out together, what do we say to this child to move them along the learning progression? Or what little shifts can we make in the instruction that will make huge differences for the whole class in front of them? We can do this daily, we can do this weekly. Sometimes we do it in the hallway as we're passing by and teachers will be like, wait, I just want to ask you, like, this kid, like, I'm not sure, this is what happened yesterday, what could I say today? And we're able to develop these relationships that working together, we're making more moves than we did in the past. We also do professional learning with the whole staff. Again, like I said, we do it in quick conversations in the hallway. We work in classrooms daily or weekly. Whenever teachers are looking for someone to hold up a mirror to their instructional practice and show them how they might shift things or tweak things to make it better.
Next, I'd like to bring up Marsha Lafette and Gina Jankura. So Marsha is a newer instructional coach to Milford, but has been a coach for a long time. And Gina is a newer teacher. They are both from Live Oaks, and I'm just going to highlight, Gina is going to be our HQI Live teacher this summer. So we are very proud of both of their work together.
First of all, thank you so much for allowing us this time and squeezing us into your evening's agenda to share a few of our coach-teacher experiences. Instructional coaching is part of a growth model that involves personalized professional learning for teachers around current research-based best instructional practices, which in turn supports student achievement. This is accomplished when coaches and teachers collaborate. We become thought partners in supporting the comprehensive development of teachers. We reflect on teaching practices to enhance elements of high-quality instruction, and we teach side by side. We reflect and respond to the evidence of student learning. The primary role we have as coaches involves instructional support. And this includes 3 main areas: responsive instruction, curriculum support, and building background content. When we are talking about responsive instruction, it involves analyzing student data and making decisions based on those needs and the data, whether it's for the whole classroom or individual students. The curriculum support happens when we are unpacking units and working together to examine the standards and skills closely, to understand the expectations, and teachers and coaches discuss high-quality instructional practices to meet the needs of the students in front of them. Additional support involves building background content. For implementing and integrating components of curriculum, it's essential for coaches to maintain and develop all teachers during a shift in practices that aligns with current research for learning. In literacy, we've worked closely with teachers in foundational reading to strengthen current literacy practices. And this year it includes phonemic awareness with Hegarty, the Milford Public School phonics that's been developed, sound walls, and literacy workstations.
So we thought you'd like to hear about what it looks like in my classroom to help you understand a little bit more about how important our coaches are to us. The following is just some of the work that we've done alongside coaches. We've examined the Hegarty assessment, which gives us information about the students' phonemic awareness, and it determines the next steps for the class as well as for small group instruction. In our second grade opinion writing unit, with the focus still on writing opinion, it shifted to highlight places in our Milford community and incorporated students' interest to encourage engagement. We incorporated components of high-quality instruction, such as we did an inquiry sort, a fact and opinion. The students generated their own success criteria. They analyzed samples of other opinion writing, and then the students took their success criteria and came up with a personal goal for themselves. The coaches also supported in the implementation of new literacy components. The sound wall, coaches came in and set up the sound wall for us. They continue to provide professional learning and demonstrate routines to utilize in the sound wall with our everyday learning. They also help develop workstations, which are new in my classroom this year. I've had support from the literacy coaches and our STEM educator in the building to help set up and implement these in the classroom. And both are going so well that we've had visitors from other schools come to see and discuss the new literacy practices with us.
And another area of support involves a process surrounding student acceleration. And coaches support teachers in a consulting capacity, which includes analyzing data and accessing additional assessments that provide more in-depth information about the student and to target the instruction that they need. We provide additional instructional approaches and strategies to support the teacher in meeting those needs. And we often use demonstration and side-by-side teaching for practices that are quite possibly new for the teacher, and as they get implemented, we're there right alongside them throughout that process, and we follow that with continued conversation around the student response and their progress that the students are making.
So I have students in my class this year who needed more intensive support. So I met with the coaches. We determined that more information was needed to figure out the next steps to help this student. So the coaches administered a reading assessment that I was unfamiliar with, and then I administered a word assessment based on phonics skills. Through collaboration, we were able to analyze the assessments and then determine the next instructional steps for the students. Side-by-side instruction has helped me learn new approaches to instruction and even implement a comprehension building program that's going to help my student obtain necessary skills to support their learning. So our final thoughts for tonight. Teacher education programs do not prepare teachers adequately for every instructional scenario involving students and their learning. Coaches support new learning and current best practices for teachers with all levels of experience by building teachers' understanding of content, adding to teachers' instructional toolboxes, and working alongside us throughout the process. I was able to accelerate and grow my students when working alongside a coach to gain knowledge and try new instructional approaches to meet the learning needs of my students.
And finally, we have 2 classroom teachers from JFK. Sydney Fielding is a grade 1 teacher, and Alicia Correa is a grade 4 teacher. They're going to talk a little bit about their experience with instructional coaching too.
Good evening, thank you for having us. My name is Alicia Correa, and I teach 4th grade at JFK, as Ms. Morrow said. And I wanted to speak to you because I've had very positive experiences with our instructional coaches. I've been at JFK for 3 years. I had an instructional coach assigned to me immediately when I came, and she has been a significant support. They have been a significant support in helping me to improve my own teaching practice and best reach the needs of all my learners.
I'm Sydney Fielding, and I teach 1st grade at JFK. I've taught at JFK for 6 years, and before that I taught at Cathpad Meadow for 3. Like Alicia, I too attribute a lot of my growth over the years to the relationships I've built with my instructional coaches. All of the coaches I've worked with have helped to build my capacity to provide high quality instruction for students, as well as strengthen my teaching pedagogy. We'd like to take a few minutes now to share specifically how our coaches support us in the classroom and the impact that support has on teaching and learning.
And some of these are very similar to what has been
Yeah.
mentioned, so that's great. The first thing we do with our coaches is we meet on a weekly basis to talk about our own teacher goals and where we want to see our students go. So this centers around best practices, setting goals for ourselves, and then we also talk about data that we want to collect in order to drive our instruction further.
Our coaches help us set personal goals based on areas that we want to improve on. They really meet us where we are as teachers. For example, last year when I taught 2nd grade, it was my 6th year teaching 2nd grade. I was really comfortable with the content and the curriculum. My goal for a portion of that year was to get better at intentionally planning lessons by thinking about potential student responses and what my feedback or coaching moves would be to those responses. Through collaboration cycles, lots of side-by-side coaching, and just the relationship that I built with my coaches in the meantime, my feedback and my ability to anticipate student responses improved greatly. Fast forward to this year, being new to 1st grade, my goals, especially in the beginning of the year once COVID restrictions were lifted, I really wanted to create a classroom space that promoted student agency and promoted learning. My coaches were on it. Beginning of the year, we were rearranging furniture. We set up classroom visits to other schools. Who can I connect with? Whose classroom can I go see? They started monitoring and collecting data on how things were going. We made plans, like Alicia was saying, about data collection. And my 1st graders are thriving in their current classroom environment. My coaches met with me where I was in both scenarios. They supported me, pushed my thinking, encouraged me, collaborated with me, and connected me to people I could learn from. I've grown a lot from experiences like this with instructional coaches.
Same, and we've mentioned the data that's collected. There's 2 forms of data that our coaches will collect first and talk about with us. So I'm speaking to data collected about my own teaching practices. These are things that I want to improve teaching moves that say I want to promote agency in my students to move from our whole group instruction and get started right away with minimal transition time, or I want students to turn to each other first before turning to me and try to solve their own problems. We come up with a coding sheet that the coaches will then come into my room and they'll watch and code what my students are doing in the moment. And this is super valuable because when I'm with a small group of students, I cannot possibly see what's going on in the rest of the class. But to have that data that they've taken for me based on my own goals to then review later, at our next collaboration meeting, we debrief and we go over together. They're not judging me, they're looking at it with me. This is what you said, this was what your student did as a result. What can we do better? How can we improve your practice to help them? And then also go over the data of what the other students were doing when I wasn't with them. So I can see my next steps. I know Ms. Morrow, I believe, mentioned the mini cycles of learning. So this is like a cycle of learning for me that I can then make a new goal and move forward next time.
We also spend a lot of time with coaches, kind of like Gina was saying, looking at more formal data and assessments. Recently, as a 1st grade team, we sat down with our coaches to look at some data from a reading assessment we administered in order to determine some next steps for struggling students. First, we looked at who are some kids who were struggling with the assessment, performing below grade level. What structures and supports are already in place? Are any of these kids in SAT? If they're not in SAT, what's already happening in the classroom that we can grow from? From there, the coaches then offered to come in and model any instructional strategies that we needed help with in our classrooms. Or they said they would come in and work directly with students to kind of check in and see, are they applying the strategies that I'm teaching independently, that extra set of eyes, that extra set of hands. I think having that in the classroom really creates such like an environment where we all know what's going on and we're all working together to meet the needs of our students.
So similar to what Sid said, co-teaching, that's another thing they do for us. They come in and they co-teach with us, and it's been mentioned before, but that is very valuable because sometimes a student will say something and you can look to them, they're right there. What would you do in this situation? Help me to learn so that next time I'm in this situation, I can use that. So they'll come in, they'll co-teach with us, they'll model efficient strategies if we'd like them to. They'll watch us and suggest alternatives. So I guess my biggest example was when I was a new teacher. This is my 3rd year teaching. So when I came in as a new teacher, I had a coach assigned to me that came in 2 to 3 times a week, and she co-taught with me and then gradually stepped out. And just, small tweaks in the language that I learned from her, small tweaks in feedback I would give to students, I really saw them grow from that.
I think it's also important, and I know a few of you mentioned this as well, that our coaches provide us with a lot of professional learning. Not only do coaches collaborate individually with teachers and with grade levels, but they're leaders at our Wednesday meetings, our staff meetings. In addition, during collaboration time, they help us unpack new curriculum. We read it, we discuss questions and wonders, we intentionally start planning what our teaching moves are gonna be, what feedback are we gonna provide to students, what are the students' needs with this new set of information and curriculum. Being new to 1st grade this year, having the coaches as a resource, and Alicia's new to her grade level, I don't think I could have navigated all of it alone. Having our coaches there was crucial and so important to help us throughout the year. And I feel like even teachers who aren't new to a grade level benefit tremendously from this support because new curriculum is always coming in and out. So having that support person and that other person to work with that new curriculum has been like the most amazing thing.
Which is our last point to make. They simply provide support. Nobody wants, I don't think anybody wants to feel like they're on an island alone in the classroom with no support. And so that's the biggest thing for me. They're there to celebrate my success. They're there to help me if something doesn't go as planned, and to work on how we can make it better. They also connect us to other classrooms. So I know Sid, I think is going to visit Gina in her classroom really soon. And then we also do this within our own building. So I was able to have a lab site in my room where 10 teachers came to watch me. Sid was a facilitator for one of them. So they connect us to each other. They help us build relationships with other teachers in our building that we might not normally work with daily. And they facilitate classroom visits in general.
Yeah. So we hope that we've been able to highlight some of the valuable experiences that we've both had with our instructional coaches and the impact that those experiences have had on teaching and learning in our classrooms. Thank you.
Thanks.
So just a couple points to close up. A couple common themes that I know I picked up on, I'm not sure if you did. Number one, I couldn't help but think about that coherence audit, and I couldn't help thinking that we had 4 different schools tonight, or 3 different schools, who don't all talk to each other on a very regular basis, but yet the through lines were really prevalent. We talked about some ways that we are directly supporting students. I heard several times that we are side by side in classrooms and moving students along learning progressions. I heard another model is that we're consulting around student data and deciding what next steps to be. Another move that several people talked about was the gradual release model, working directly with students so that teachers can see how to best support the students in their classrooms. We talked a little bit about another through line of coherence was the small continuous cycles of improvement for both students and adults. And finally, we talked about the benefit of co-teaching and having that thought partner in the moment to help you refine your practice. We know that this is not in 251 classrooms yet, but we also know that when we have teachers who are open to working with instructional coaches, we are seeing the benefits, and you've heard it directly tonight from the teachers who are willing and open to have those dialogues with their instructional coaches. Thank you very much for the time.
Thank you. Happy to take questions, Ms. Glennon. Questions from board members?
Ms. Irby?
Yes. I have a question for the teachers. How do you think the students see the instructional coaches in the classroom?
As another teacher.
Yeah.
And
Just
they
another
love-
teacher?
They love when they come in. They like, it's like a big deal. Yeah, they love it.
Not an interruption to them?
No.
It just is.
And they are teachers.
That's-
Coaches are in the
that's my
teachers'
question.
bargaining unit. They are officially teachers.
They are teachers, right?
Yep.
And the,
They are, side by side, teachers developing their own craft. I think a little bit too, if we're gonna speak honestly, that coaches are also growing as teachers are growing.
Ms. McDonough Souza?
Thank you. You ended by saying that teachers who are open to working with these coaches are really seeing the results. So I guess my question is, what about the teachers who aren't open to working with these coaches? And in that case, if the teacher isn't open to working with the coaches, do the coaches still get into the classroom to help the students?
Absolutely. So we believe, when we rolled out instructional coaching, and we talked to the board before, we believe in coaching for all. So we believe that everybody has an entry point. So we know some entry points are easier than others. We know some people, the entry point is their students. So by having conversations in SAT or by having conversations around student data, we know that that's an entry point. But then we have teachers like Gina, and Anne Marie is here too but didn't speak, and Sydney and Alicia that are all looking to grow their personal practice. So those are the teachers where when we say they're open to it, Alicia talked, I think, a little bit about before by asking a coach to come in and quote her feedback. Those are the kinds of teachers where we're seeing the most success. But we believe in a model for coaching for all. So all coaches work with all teachers, including our specialists as well. We didn't touch on those tonight, but our specialists and our special education will get coaching as well.
So are each of the coaches assigned to certain classrooms in the school, or how does that work? Or they, any classroom can see any?
Yeah, we're definitely not assigned.
Okay.
Some of it happens organically, like through SAT. We do, in our school, we have weekly collaboration meetings, so a lot of it comes out of those meetings, whether it's with math or ELA, a need will come up and they'll be like, oh, let's work on that. And so then we'll start something. So we're not assigned, at least not in our school.
Again, that model of coherence, it's not
Right.
it's not an assignment of a coach. That's not how we deploy coaches. We deploy coaches to grow instructional capacity.
Okay.
But it does happen at different levels and different entry points for different teachers and different grade levels.
Okay, thank you. And the presentation was great, and I enjoyed hearing from all of you directly, so thank you.
So SAT is student assistant team?
Yes.
Mr. DeYoung?
Thank you. I also appreciated the presentation. It was very interesting. Ms. Morrow, before I get to my main question, could you just sort of go over this chart a little bit that's at the end of the presentation?
Which one?
This one?
The
Color.
current reality,
Yep.
3 to 5. And can you just kind of explain, I don't know why I can't really interpret it.
That's fine. So one of the ways, as we mentioned before, we've recently onboarded a new data platform. One of the advantages of the data platform is that we have a variety of literacy assessments, right? We want to make sure we have a well-rounded profile for students in the area of literacy. What we're highlighting here is that when we see instructional coaching at its finest, we're actually now able to look more specifically in the data platform to see the direct correlation to student outcomes. So you'll see on the chart to the column to the left, is a current grade 3 in Milford Public Schools, a current grade 4 in the middle, and a current grade 5 all the way to the right. So again, what we're demonstrating is that as we're able to look at data more specifically with the onboarding of the data platform, and our coaches are able to talk with us about who they're most working with and how that's going, we're able to see a correlation between the increase of student outcomes and also the increase of teacher capacity. So they're kind of going together is what we're noticing.
Can you just explain the red, yellow, green?
Oh, yes,
blue,
of course.
green?
So red would be students who are not meeting. Yellow would be students who are approaching grade level. Green is grade level, and blue is exceeding grade level.
Okay, so this is one particular school?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
One test in February.
Yep. We just give you a snapshot. We're
From
seeing
this
in
past
other areas.
February?
Mhm.
Okay. So there's not, I mean, I want to just make sure I'm reading it right, because I don't want to say, it doesn't look like there's a giant jump, at least between 3rd and 4th grade, for instance,
So these are all separate classes.
Okay.
So we're not monitoring, it's not cohort to cohort.
Mhm.
It's not grade 3 to grade 4.
Okay.
This is our one school's current 3rd grade class,
Mhm.
one school's current 4th grade class, one school's current 5th grade class. So what you're seeing is a snapshot of just that one assessment in February. So we're not showing you the fall, the winter, and the spring.
Right.
We're just showing you the impact of coaching on student outcomes.
And how do you, let me ask you, how do you read this, right? Because I'm not getting that correlation from the chart, so how
Because
do
she
you?
knows who the teachers are.
I know who the teachers are.
And she knows
So
who's
if you
getting
look
coaching.
at,
Okay, but that makes sense.
there's a particular teacher that you can tell, the 94% grade 5.
Mm-hmm.
That teacher has engaged in multiple coaching cycles throughout the year.
Okay.
So sorry,
That's okay.
I know who the teachers are, so I can tell that because this teacher has engaged in multiple coaching cycles throughout the year. Of course, this is her literacy data,
Mhm.
but it could also be numeracy. So because of that, you can see the correlation with the 94%.
And you have the same data for numeracy?
Too.
Okay. That's helpful, because
Sorry about that.
that's okay. So I wanted to ask, sort of piggyback on what Ms. McDonough-Souza was asking about how coaching is implemented classroom to classroom. Because as you talked about, there are teachers who are entering it at different levels of comfort. And so in the school, if you could just talk about from a practical standpoint, in the school, how it's determined on a class-by-class basis. Is the teacher saying, I'm only comfortable with SAT, entering it through SAT? Is the principal saying, that's not good enough? Like, could you just talk about exactly how that process works, even if you just want to use, a general
Yeah, so
scope?
we, Dr. Kataya talked earlier about the improvement process. So we're using that as sort of our coaching framework. What we're hoping to get to, and again, as you noticed in the timeline, we're still in development in some of these processes. COVID has stunted us a little bit with this. So what we're hoping to get to is that the leadership team, who's mainly made of the principal, the instructional coaches, the teacher leader sometimes, and sometimes school counselors, will look at student data. And then from that student data, they'll sort of identify their trends within the building. They'll identify a current reality, they'll identify areas where students are really excelling, and they'll want to look at why are those students excelling. And then that will be the start of the conversation. And then instructional coaching is a great way to build all teacher capacity. So in some instances, it may be around student data. There may be a conversation when Mrs. LaPut sits down with a classroom teacher, and the classroom teacher says, oh, I've got these 4 students, I've tried everything, I don't know what to do. That may be the entry point. Another teacher may have, like Mrs. Correa, may say, like, I really want to be responsive and I want to plan my feedback. So that may be her entry point. The principals are not deciding the entry points. We really, as Mrs. LaPut said, we really want it to be an organic process. We're not looking to force coaching on anybody. We're trying to understand where teachers are and be there as a level of support for what they need. So some teachers are really great at advocating for what they need, like our teachers here tonight, and other teachers feel a little bit more hesitant. Some of it's for a personal belief, some of it's because they aren't sure why instructional coaching. So this gives them an opportunity. It gives Mrs. LaPut a foot in the door, or Mrs. Delmonte, or it gives them a foot in the door. And then once they're in the door, they'll say, well, did you think about this? You know what? Can I model that for you? Can I show you how that might look? So they use sometimes the SAT data as an entry point to get a foot in the door and talk about students and talk about how to support students, because ultimately that's what we're here for.
I just think that the data is so stark in the difference between classrooms that don't engage in instructional coaches and those that do, that there's got to, and I appreciate the need to allow it to happen organically. There's got to be a way that we can accelerate it. I know you guys are, I'm sure, thinking about it, but it just seems to me that that's like almost like mission number 1 is how can we now see this data and go, all right, let's accelerate it so that every kid can see it, every teacher can see it, more importantly. So
It's an age-old problem, though, Mr. DeYoung. It's an age-old problem. You have some teachers that go to PD and come back and engage in different instructional practices, and some that it just It's a developmental process for every professional.
Right.
We're working with human beings, right? And we want to take every kid where they are, but we also want every teacher where they are too. And forced compliance to coaching isn't gonna change practice.
No, I understand that, yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So we didn't build that culture here in Milford. We're building it at own your own professional learning. Guide your own professional learning. We've put these supports in place. But we're not gonna do improvement by compliance. Rather, it's a process, and there are lots of ways to get to it. While we're focusing on coaching tonight, it's a slither, right? We also have the power of professional learning communities, PLCs, where grade levels, teachers across the school, across the system sometimes, work on a common goal. That's another opportunity for growing that coaches, I think, jump into occasionally. So I know we're talking about coaching, and this is like a huge investment, big lever for us, but it's one piece of a bigger picture also. I don't want us to forget that part, okay?
Fair enough. Appreciate it, thank you.
Ms. Petrosky?
So I think this is touching a little bit upon what everyone else has been talking about, which is, for me, the coherence, right? So you have some people who are like, yay, yay, rah, rah, I want as much as I can get, and some who are kind of like, oh, a little more hesitant about it. So how do we get to a point where we are ensuring coherence across the system?
Well, it's the same question I think I was asked about HQI, right? So
Right.
it's 251 classrooms at the elementary level, 491 actual physical spaces of learning in 14 schools. So that takes time. That takes the right conditions and culture. It takes not being reduced by $1.8 million. Like, it's just, there are a lot of pieces to supporting. Remember, we are human capital driven. We are asking people to change their practice, develop and grow, because no teacher is like done. Nobody walks out of grad school and says, okay, I've learned everything I can at the age of 22. I'm ready to be an expert for the next 30 years. Right? Nope. Says no one. So I think that is the challenge. In improvement science, one of the biggest goals is shrinking variance of practice. And you even saw it in one of the reviews, I forget which one, but we potentially have practice vastly different in the same grade level in 2 classrooms next door to each other. That's our challenge as leaders, right? To shrink that variance. A big bet for us to shrink the variance in practice around curriculum, high quality instruction, and use of assessment, and experience for kids, the big bet is coaching. So I think teachers have to trust coaches. Teachers have to be open to sharing their practice with coaches. Teachers have to trust their administrators that they can go to their coaches. And teachers have to see that this is just a growth process for everybody. We're not targeting, Emily needs more help than Adam, than Andy, like, it's just growth for all. And if we're gonna be fair, we did it, we started last year officially. Last year was different of a year. Like, we're in this 6 months. And there are some people though, Ms. Petrosky, if we're just gonna speak honest, out of 251 teachers, we may have some teachers saying, no, thank you. Those are the ones that that's always going to be the case, regardless of what we talk about, right? Equitable practice, no thank you. Access for all kids to AP. We already have some teachers that are not 100% on board with that. High quality instruction, I already do that, thanks. I don't need that. Now, lucky for us in MPS, that's not a large percentage. We have really high level professional staff. So we have a very, very strong pool. So that is a good question that we're going to take on every day. How do you bring coherence across 251?
Dr. Kataya, may I add in one other point. So another point that didn't come out as a theme that probably should have is the idea that coaches are the ones who are instrumental in setting up lab sites. So I know Dr. Kataya has talked before about the idea of building teacher leadership and how important that is. So even if a teacher doesn't necessarily want to enter in a coaching cycle, they're still working with the coach through that lab site experience, through professional learning. So I think we have to make sure, Dr. Kataya said this before, you know, we're looking at slivers of coaching in this side-by-side moment, but really coaching is much more than that. So they are instrumental in the HQI implementation at all 8 elementary schools, and that is helping to bring a strong level of coherence. So if a teacher doesn't want to engage in a coaching cycle yet, they may engage in a lab site. So they are going to get some peer-to-peer coaching, but the coach is instrumental in facilitating that lab site. They're the ones that are making sure that the instructional practice is there. They're the ones that are making sure that there's a pre-brief, a debrief. The themes are coming out in that debrief. So even though you may not necessarily have, you know, one of our instructional coaches side by side in that particular teacher's room, there is a different entry point and a different level of coaching that is happening with that teacher. So I think that's an important piece to remember as well. Those lab sites are also very important and happening in all 8 of our elementary schools.
I would just add to another thing that everyone gets. So coaches unpack curriculum with every teacher. So when we have new curriculum, that's part of the routine. So grade levels teachers, no one's not doing that. Everyone. Right. So it may be that's an entry point through the curriculum piece. So there's, just to piggyback what Ms. Moore was saying, there's a lot of ways that we're giving teachers access to coaching support based on kind of where they are in their growth process at the moment.
That's a huge entry point, actually.
And when we think about it, if we had 30% of our elementary kids in 2013 in intervention, this model is going to significantly reduce the number of kids that go to SAT as our bet. Right? So if the ultimate goal is to improve student learning, this is an accelerated way to get to kids, whether 251 are on board or not. It's still an accelerated way to get to more kids, because a coach is working with a teacher not just on that 1 or 2 children that might be struggling, but you've just increased the capacity of that teacher to get to all kids. And what we can't measure is how many kids did not fall behind because that teacher's capacity was increased.
Yeah, I see so many benefits to this. I mean, the fact that a remedial reading teacher, whoever that was 30 years ago, didn't really have the opportunity to interact with the classroom teacher about these kids. I mean, that's, you know, I don't know how you could advance with that model. So I absolutely see the benefit of the coaches being more intimately involved with the teacher in the education process of each child, or as a group of children. I mean, it just makes total sense. Total sense.
But we, as you're hearing, have some teachers that just want their interventionists back.
Yeah, no, I get that, but I literally, when you said that, I was like, oh, aha. Yeah, that just makes completely logical sense. If you have multiple teachers working with a single child, there has to be communication. There has to be some coordination. Otherwise, each benefit, you could be literally working directly against each other.
Men work with 20 to 30 kids a year with 18 teachers. Likely you're spread across, or maybe you were doing K2 or 3-5 or something, right? So maybe
But you could conceivably, both teachers could conceivably be working absolutely against each other with that child without that communication.
And I think what Meg, and I appreciate your honesty, Meg, because interventionists by nature, I think, over-scaffold kids. If we're going to be honest, right?
That was our job. Okay, this is the word cat. Let's say to the cat, right? And then they weren't getting that, right? So total hand-holding. Biggest aha moment for me is oh my gosh, I built the bridge over the struggling cat, right? The learning bit. Oh my gosh, what was I doing? But there is something to say, and we did try to collaborate with classroom teachers as interventionists, but it was oftentimes just saying, hey, this is what we're working on, this is our next step. It really, while we probably try to have conversations about how you can support them in the classroom. Whether we didn't get to that point or whether the classroom teachers just, not to their own fault, but didn't have the capacity to continue doing what we were doing, right? That wasn't their specialty, quote unquote. And again, not to their fault, but it was just something that we took care of, right? We took the kids. That was they were now our kids, right?
Well, I imagine
They
that.
go down the hallway, they're your kids now. We'll
Yeah,
fix them.
yeah, but I would imagine that if you are an interventionist and you're trying to coordinate with the teacher, there's different teaching styles. If you're not in that classroom and seeing the here and the now.
Even just like having the same language now, right? Like
Yeah.
we might call I'm blanking on an example of it, but what I might call something, they're using it differently. So now the kid thinks it's two separate things when really, in reality, it's the same thing.
Yeah.
I'm sure that happens more often.
Just to underscore the coherence thing, I mean, I think the fact that the coach is side by side with the teacher, so when something happens with a kid, they can talk about it in that moment. It's not like, oh, we have a collab next Tuesday, and we'll talk about what happened. You'll remember, right? Like, and now it's 7 days later, and the kid, now we'll do this, instead of doing it right then and there. And then I think the coherence work you brought up too, where what happened in an intervention model is likely the kid is going and getting, some type of instruction that is completely separate from what the core grade level content is. And then maybe brought back to the classroom halfway through the reading of the math block. And, the teacher would say, well, they don't know what to do. And it's like, well, yeah, they just walked in halfway through the movie and you're expecting them to know the plot. Like, that's not really fair. So this way they stay there the whole time. There is coherence in their, like what they're getting, what they see, and they're able to connect to the current learning, any unfinished learning that's being addressed. So I think those are key things that we're able to address with this model that just can't, like to your point, just can't be done well in the other intervention remedial model.
Yeah.
Yes, Ms. McDonough-Souza.
Thanks. Just a quick question. So my understanding is that there are 4 coaches per elementary school, correct? So I don't know if there's a way to measure this, but has there been any feedback or anything as to whether that number of 4 per elementary school is like the perfect number? Are coaches like at capacity? Like if we had our druthers, we would rather have more coaches per elementary school, or is it like, in some schools the coaches like not, they don't have as much to do? Do we have any feedback on 4 per elementary school? That's a good number.
I haven't heard stories of people sitting around. And honestly, Ms. McDonough-Souza, in this environment, I don't like to talk about, post-COVID learning. But we're seeing an impact. Like, our students, let's say, our third graders of just a few years ago are not the third graders of today. There are some learning gaps there. So this wouldn't be the time to unplug coaching in any way. 4 feels like a rich model, right? Like, oh, wow, that's nice. But if we're talking about working with kids and teachers, now you're not only looking at working like at Pumpkin with 18 teachers, you're looking at working with 18 teachers and 300 kids. And that's 4 adults. So I would challenge you to think, wow, 4 coaches for one school. Well, wait a minute. We're not just thinking about the adults. This is an adult and teacher, adult and student approach. So 4, and then you divide that into 400, right? So I would say that 4 is a sweet spot for us. And we did it so that we didn't come and ask for more FTEs. Like, we made the bet. We traded in the intervention for the coach. I'd hate for like that move to now we take the consequence of, oh, now we're gonna it's all right, we'll take half of them away. Because 4 feels like it's a rich model, but, oh, wait a minute, now we only have 2 people to support kids and adults, right? So I think it's easy for people outside of this room who didn't hear this presentation tonight to say, whoa, you got 4 coaches? What? That's a lot of people sitting around doing nothing, or not understanding that, yes, they do work all day.
Right.
And, right?
In the schools.
Can I tell you all my hats? Oh my God. Yes.
In schools, and you guys, you engage in the same level of district meetings as any other teacher.
Yeah.
You're attending PL, you're attending meetings to help write curriculum, right?
Writing curriculum.
But you're school-based people,
Right.
that's your family. Live Oaks is your family. You have the staff T-shirt to prove it and everything, right? So they are building-based individuals.
So to be clear, there was no additional FTEs, it's just you shifted
We
the
shifted,
model.
yep.
So it's same FTEs, so budget neutral. They can work with kids, they are working with kids. So it's
Suspected that they
untrue
work
to
with
say that
kids.
they're not allowed to work with kids, that's not a truth, correct?
That is the first bullet point in their job description.
Working with
That they work
kids.
with students.
And a child who is truly struggling with reading would have additional help through.
They're likely in the SAT process.
Yes, that was my next.
SAT is a bunch of professionals around the same table, taking a much closer look at the child's struggles. There's a strategy. We are revamping our SAT process, so alongside of this is also another thing that's a change for teachers, right? So it's just all beautiful,
All right, you'll have to go into
great
it.
storm, right? So their kids are getting help through that SAT process, but that's just looking different, right? So the end of SAT in Tier 2 and 3 doesn't necessarily mean that Ms. Del Monte is going to now pick up that kid on her caseload and grab the kid at 11 o'clock, walk down the hallway, and return at 11:30. So that's a model that teachers are used to. So if you're hearing there's no Tier 3, what you're really hearing is there's no Tier 3 like it used to look like. There's a different model, and coaches do work with kids, and it's on an individual, kid-by-kid basis. Sometimes it's, yes, that kid needs extra time, but to Dr. Nobley's point, not during the grade level time, though. And that begs the question, so what is it okay for an elementary kid to miss? It's been an age-old question. Do you want to miss math to get extra reading? You're not allowed to pull out a PE. Don't take them out of recess. Of course you don't want them to miss art, music, library. So there's something missing. So that's a challenge when we're looking at additional supports for Tier 3 kids.
Well, thank you very much for the presentation, it's getting.
Can I ask one last question? Is it fair to say that is it fair to say that the remediation model, the model for spending the time with kids is now more just in time in a classroom versus taking them out of the classroom, going in the back?
I think we heard examples of just-in-time intervention.
I mean, that's really what this shift is doing. Okay, thank you.
We're gonna send people home, is that okay?
We still have a little bit of our agenda left.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for coming, it was very informational.
We still have superintendent's report left.
Yes, we do.
Thank you. Okay. High school graduation dates. So our last day of school is June 14th, we hope. The two dates for graduation are held as the 13th and 14th. Yes. Law is slated to graduate the first night, followed by foreign on the second.
Motion?
I'd like to make a motion that the Milford Board of Education establishes graduation dates of Tuesday, June 13th, 2023, and Wednesday, June 14th, 2023, for the senior classes of law and foreign high schools respectively. Graduation ceremony should begin at 5:15 p.m. for both high schools.
Is there a second?
Second?
Second by Mr. Fowler. Do we have any discussion? Seeing none, all in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries unanimously.
Thank you, board members. Moving on to Ms. Capazza's HR report.
Thank you. You have the report this month, which includes the job postings, personnel recommendations, retirements, resignations, terminations, and stipend appointments. I want to point out that, of course, the job posting list has a lot of postings for our summer programs. So that's why the list is so long. And also want to mention we are up to 5 retirements. And I do know personally of 2 more coming in, so I know we'll be at least at 7. I think after April break, this is when people start to really consider. And I think we'll be seeing a few more letters of retirement within the next month. Just a guess.
Questions for Ms. Kapasna on the HR report? I see none.
Thank you, and we'll move on to the quarterly budget report with Mr. Riccitelli.
Thank you, Dr. Kataya. Mrs. Glenn and members of the board. As you know, we come to you quarterly in accordance with your governance policy to give you a report on where we are with the budget. And you know, I want to start out by saying that I've been around a while. This is probably the most difficult budget at this point that I've seen since I've been here at Milford Public Schools. That's not to say that we haven't taken prudent measures to make sure that we end the year in the black, because we will. Dr. Kataya and I, when you had your orientation, we guaranteed you that we won't put you in jeopardy of having a budget that's over budget and in deficit, so we're not going to do that. But if you just go to the bottom line on page 3, at this point, if you were to look at the report, we would be approximately $1.2 million in deficit. Now that's not going to happen at the end, and that's why I'm going to tell you why. We've taken steps throughout the year because we knew there's nothing on this report, and nothing that I'm going to tell you tonight that I haven't already put on your radar screen before this. So I will highlight some of the areas that we've been having concern with throughout the year, and then talk to you about how we think we're going to make up for that bottom line deficit at this point. So let's just go right to, we'll start right out, and I'll talk about some of the areas that we've had concern. I always talk about first the teacher salary line 1111, because that's our biggest. At this point, we are very close. Sometimes at this point in the school year, we see that with a couple of $100,000 in surplus. Right now, we're very close, which is where we should be. I should point out that with this budget, and Dr. Kataya's insistence on zero-based budgeting, we've gotten much, much leaner because we're looking at, from the very start, that zero base and really building from there. And so the budgets in the past where there may have been some surpluses at this point at the end of the year, we're not seeing those now because of that emphasis on that zero-based budgeting and really getting down to exactly what the district needs, which is the right way to budget. And so the account 1117, teacher substitutes, as I've been telling you all along, that we do expect a deficit of about $140,000. That's for 2 reasons. One is because we raised the substitute rate to $140 a day so we would be able to get substitutes, and it was pretty successful in doing that. And the other reason is because we haven't been able to get interns, and that's on account line number 3212. There just hasn't been the interns. That's part of the trend that we see with, maybe post-COVID, maybe even further, that we don't have as many teachers willing to be interns. And so instead of having those interns who acted as building subs, we had to hire additional building subs. And so that's adding to the line in account 1117, teacher substitutes. We have a couple of offsets, 1122 and 1125, custodians and paraprofessionals. We have a decent-sized surplus in those two accounts, and that's because of vacancies. We know that we haven't been able to hire paraprofessionals, so there's been a number of vacancies. And the same thing with custodians. There's been a number of vacancies throughout the year that we are in the process of filling. Probably the biggest line that I want to bring to your attention, and Mrs. Kapazina just talked about it, and that's the retirement line, 1130. Right now, with only five retirement announcements, that's way below our average. That's way below what we budget for. And so that's why you see a very decent surplus in that account. But if Mrs. Kapazina's intuition is correct, we could be eating into that number a little bit, because every retirement that we get, there's some severance that's paid out. So we need to watch that one closely, but that's where that number is right now. And we've actually, in addition to the 5 that have already announced their retirement, we've also built in a couple of more. So we still have a little cushion in that account, but once we get past, the 7, 8, 9, then we're gonna be digging into that line item. So account 3235, there's a deficit there. Other pupil personnel services. As I've told you before, there were some areas that we weren't able to hire professionals, and so we had to go to agency placements instead of providing those services by a Milford Public Schools employee, and so that came out of that account, and that's why you see a deficit there. Legal services. At the end of the second quarter, I told you that, well, the quarterly budget report showed that we were $67,000, and that deficit has continued to grow. It's currently at $85,000, and again, what I told you, it's because we had 4 negotiations this year. Our biggest one, of course, is the teachers' union negotiations. In addition, the number of expulsions that the district has had to deal with in other kinds of student-related issues that are taking place, probably tied to, the social, emotional, the mental health issues coming out of COVID. But that certainly is impacting legal services account. That's where that amount, that's where that deficit can be attributed to. Contracted services, there's a healthy surplus there, and that's because we moved the athletic trainers, if you recall. We used to hire athletic trainers out of contracted services. Now we're paying them out of non-certified professional accounts. So we have a surplus there. And in addition, we didn't have much snow this year, so we didn't have to have outside contractors that we budgeted for snow. So a decent surplus there. We're doing fine in our utilities. As I told, last year was disastrous with utilities. Electricity and natural gas was, we had huge deficits last year, but we are in a locked-in contract price right now, and so we're doing fine in our utility accounts. In all of the other facilities accounts, the 4,300, I'm on page 2 now, I'm sorry, 4,300 through 4,308, some of those accounts you see at 0. That means that we've encumbered the money for it, but that doesn't mean that we've spent all that money yet. We've reserved the money, but if we come down to the end and we see that we're going to be in a tight situation, we will hold on to those purchase orders and not release them until we know that we're going to be able to make it at the end of the year. So that's one area where even though it shows that there's 0% available balance, that those dollars are encumbered, but we may not actually use those if we don't need to use them. So again, those prudent measures that we're taking to avoid any kind of a problem at the end. Our biggest, the biggest amount of money that we have in the budget is attributed to 5101-0203, that's the special education transportation accounts, and also down 5600 and 5601. And those are the transportation and tuition accounts for special education. And we always run deficits in these. And then, as I tell you, that we don't get too concerned about it because they're pretty much offset by the excess cost grant. This year, the excess cost grant money that we anticipate the city will be getting back will not match the deficit that we have in those accounts. And Mr. Brown has talked about some of the, especially at budget time, talked about some of the new students that have moved into the district unexpectedly and additional services that students are requiring. So there is more in those accounts than the excess cost grant will cover. But we've compensated for that in other areas. So another big one, which is no surprise to you, is 5107, which is the fuel for the buses. I've been telling you all along that's an issue. So down to account 6,000, that's the freeze account. And this is one of those things that we did right after the new year. We put a 10% freeze on all instructional and non-instructional accounts, both for the schools in the per pupil expenditure and for the instructional division. So we've told everybody you need to prioritize. You need to take a look at what we most need, and we've reserved 10% of that for this rainy day to be able to cover the deficits that we have. And now on to page 3. Another one is account 8,000. That's the freeze account for the student activities. I'm sorry, the freeze account for other support, which includes professional development and other student activities. And the same thing, we put a 10% freeze on those accounts so that we have a decent surplus there to offset some of the deficits that we have in other accounts. So I think those are the highlights. Again, it's going to be a really close budget, but we will end with a balanced budget. And I'm happy to answer any questions that you have this time.
Do we know at this point what the excess cost grant will be?
It fluctuates, but we're anticipating around 1.2, 1.3 million.
Okay. Questions for Mr. Richtelli? Mr. DeYoung?
Thank you. Mr. Richtelli, thank you for the detail on this. It does seem like it's quite the budget that you're dealing with. The excess cost grant, could you just talk about how that ended last year for us, just so you can remind us how that played out, and then we're anticipating that it won't cover all of our expenses this year.
Yeah, last year we didn't have the deficit that we have this year. Right. And so in actuality, we didn't need to cover as great a deficit in those accounts, so the city actually kept some of that money. And we're only entitled to what our deficit is. And so we have to send, Dr. Kataya has to send a memo to the mayor each year saying, this is the amount of our deficit, this is what you're taking in from the state in excess cost, this is what we're asking the city to give us to cover that deficit. Last year, our deficit was not as great, so the city actually benefited. I don't know the exact amount.
I do.
We can get the number.
I know.
It's like $1 million.
Yeah.
It was a $1.2 million grant. We used $332,736, and we left $917,419 with the city.
So that was money that the city took in as revenue that was not on the revenue for the budget. That was excess revenue for the city.
And is that because we utilized our own responsible budgeting to cover some of those expenses so that we didn't end up with a surplus? In our general fund, I mean?
Not really.
Okay.
Because you can only apply excess cost money to the deficit in special education costs.
Okay.
So it only applies to those areas. the other things that we, the other things in the budget would be other accounts that we wouldn't be able to apply to excess cost anyway.
It's really about the experiences of the students in front of you with special needs, right?
Yeah,
Basically.
last year we had some high-cost students move out of Milford
Oh, okay.
after the budget was designed. We also had developed some more robust in-house programs. So students we anticipated getting an out-of-district placement didn't. And, some of it was luck that people moved out, and some of it was good programming that students stayed in the district instead of going to specialized schools.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Mr. Doyle?
I don't know if you know the answer to this question, or if it's feasible, or if something we want to do. I'm not saying it is or isn't. Legal services.
Yes.
Is that something you just touched on, bringing more things in-house? Is Milford a district that could have a internal lawyer instead of having to go for outside counsel for a lot of their services?
We could talk about that.
We could talk about that.
You piqued my interest, yes. But,
Not obviously at this moment in this
you're
conversation.
still gonna need some outside consulting because,
Right.
like for expulsion, you need a hearing officer, impartial, right? So you can't have your own counsel running that.
But we could minimize some costs in certain aspects in terms of policy. I mean, we utilize outside counsel to look at policies, to look for, that we come before the board, which is expensive, or any of those kind of routine matters could be potentially utilized internally.
They could be.
They could.
The whole budget, or the adjusted budget, is about $265,000. So between hiring a full-time lawyer with expertise in,
Right.
in school-related matters, and also looking for those specialized services, I don't know, I don't know, but it's something that we certainly could take a look at. I mean, that's the
I want
model.
us to do an analysis of
You have
the,
to add in benefits as well.
Right.
Right,
Of
besides
course.
salary.
I was just curious, because this
What'd you
seems to
say?
be,
You have to add
The
in the
last 2
benefits.
years
too.
we've been-
So if you're hiring your own employee, you have to add in the benefits.
Correct.
yeah, now I think we should do a multi-year analysis. Look at how it goes up during, big bargaining unit. One strategy school districts have taken on is actually hiring someone with legal background into the HR department. And so if we get that opportunity, not that we've really budgeted a big salary for that assistant,
just curious. And
Yeah,
that,
no,
it's just
it's a
something
good point.
to discuss maybe in the future, not tomorrow and not in the next 6 months. But, so that's it. That's all the question I have.
Any other questions for Mr. Richatelli? Ms. Boynton?
I'm just curious, that $900,000 in excess funds that was given to the city last year, is that typical of, no?
No.
there is money that goes back every year though.
No,
Not
not
all
every year.
years, not all years, but that information is actually in the budget book each year. I print in the budget book how much we gave to the city, or it broke even. So there are years that money goes back to the city, there are years that the city gives us everything.
Would it be possible to know how much we've given back to the city as a gift for the
Sure.
past 5-6 years?
I can give you those calculations.
That would be lovely. Thank you.
Any other questions?
So we're holding our breath, everything has to land just right for June.
Should we cross our fingers?
So part of this, Ms. Glenn, I think it's worth underscoring that where at one time we moved monies over at the end of the year to building and grounds, that's not happening.
Correct.
So-
And it hasn't happened in a few years.
Right, and so the better we become at budgeting, the less surplus there is, right? So that's the ethical and responsible thing to do. No fat being built into this budget, okay? But if you take a look at our building and grounds lines, they haven't been robust. And Pat isn't getting the benefit of end of year money, so we gotta keep an eye on that. Our projects are we're not getting to our projects that we want to.
think about for next budget.
Yes, ma'am. Okay, we are gonna move on. There aren't any, sorry, there were, I didn't see.
Yep, last disbursement report.
Thank you. Board members, in your package is the usual list of all of the disbursements for the district over the amount of $1,500. And those highlighted in yellow are COVID-related, although I don't know if we have any. Yeah, we do. We still have some. And I'm happy to answer any questions that you have on the report.
I had a question on page 21 of the packet. Toward the top, Durham School Services, it's $3,162 for February for transportation,
Yes.
Boys and Girls Club. Are we still?
No, we don't, yeah, that's a very good question. We don't, because the Boys and Girls Club is piggybacking off of our contracted rates, Durham bills us, and then we bill Boys and Girls Club and they reimburse us.
Alrighty, very good.
It's a wash. Yeah, thank you for asking that.
Mr. DeYoung?
Thank you. Just wanted to ask my monthly update on the trailers. I see that we're still paying for them.
We are.
We're going to for a long time.
For a long time? Okay, then I'll stop asking.
Not until
few
we get a
months.
storage place,
Yeah.
right?
Right.
So, we bought desks because we had to socially distance. I don't know where to put those.
Where are the trailers living right now? Are they on school grounds or?
No, they're at Eagle
Eagle
Leasing,
Hill.
I think in
East
Orange.
Hill? Oh, where?
I
Oh,
believe
in
it's
Orange?
Eagle Leasing in
Oh,
Orange.
okay, all right.
Yeah,
So it's really, it literally is
It's
just
off-site.
storage, offsite storage?
Yes.
Okay, thanks.
Other questions?
That's all
All
for
set?
the
Okay.
superintendent's report. Thank you.
All right, move on to consent agenda, Ms. Petrosky.
I'd like to make a motion that the Milford Board of Education approves the consideration of minutes for March 13th, 2023 business meeting, March 27th, 2023 committee of the whole meeting, March 29th, 2023 special meeting.
Is there a second?
I second.
Mr. Fowler has seconded. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries unanimously. Board comment?
I had something
Ms. Petrosky?
I just want to kind of put it out there, you know, we just talked about budget stuff here, and obviously there is a big white elephant in the room about, you know, the budget cut that we're facing, potentially, if that's not filled. I do support fully funding the budget that we proposed. I know that the administration was very thoughtful, spent a lot of time and effort on proposing what the schools need, not what we'd like to see or big pie in the sky stuff. It's what we need. And I've been struggling with what our options are, quite honestly. I'm assuming everybody else has as well. It's a little scary for me that if we don't get any funding back, when I look at these numbers, I quite frankly, and I'll share it with everybody here, quite frankly, I think our only option is going to be to close the school, which is absolutely horrendous to have to say. But I just wanted to share that with everybody else on the board, that's my thinking at this point.
Thank you, Ms. Petrosky. Ms. Doyle?
I want to say thank you to the administration, all the teachers who come to this evening, all the parents that have come out to our Edu meeting, the Board of Aldermen meeting, to all the work they've done into here. I thought this meeting pulled everything in for me in terms of what it means in terms of the budget and why every single dollar needs to be put into that budget. Before I am here today, I was a personal trainer for a decade. And I remember the first day I was a personal trainer, and I sucked. I sucked as a trainer. And I hurt my clients. And I say that not in a way, but I didn't know what I was doing. Even though I was certified, even though I had done all the things that got me to what I needed. I needed instructional coaches to make me better at my job a decade later so that I could teach other trainers. Can I do those things to be able to move forward and have a successful business? And at the end of the day, the business here is the business of students and teaching students, and we have to focus on our human capital. So we have to invest in every single teacher, every administrator, every paraprofessional, every staff, every custodian, every athletic trainer that we have serving within our district. So we need the money to support human capital and the talent. We need the money to support facilities. We've discussed multiple times in each one of these budgets how we are zero funding and that we are going to take a surplus and put in our maintenance. We've already zero budgeted that. There is no excess. We've discussed that here. We need that money. We can't pull from there in those spaces because we are just deferring costs. There isn't a time to cut it back. I agree with Ms. Petrosky. The only option is to close the school, which is not a great option. If we are to come with that horrific cut of $1.8 million. And this whole process demonstrates that we are moving forward. One thing I've noticed in my time on the board, which isn't very long, is that there's a lot of things that haven't happened over the last 20 years. That there's a lot of time to gap fill or trying to catch up or change systems. And this presentation tonight, to look at and say in 2013 we have agency come in and say, these are X, Y, and Z problems. And a decade later, we are finally starting to see the progress of those changes is extraordinarily important, and especially with COVID thrown in the middle and everything being shut down. So to me, we need to have every single dollar in this budget, and I want next year more money. Because at the end of the day, 1% to 2% cut seems insignificant. If it was so not significant, we wouldn't be talking about closing a school. We would not be talking about it. We would be talking about cutting back on maintenance. We'd be talking about, I don't even know, because there's nothing really to cut here. I mean, we can talk about special education services, but as Mr. Brown said, we got lucky that we saved almost $1 million in costs last year. We don't know what's gonna happen, and we have to plan for the future and budget responsibly, but make sure we fund accordingly.
Thank you. Other board comment? Ms. McDonough Souza?
Thank you. I thought Ms. Doyle said it perfectly, so I will incorporate her comment into mine, except for the part about being a personal trainer. Definitely never been. But I just want to echo that I appreciate hearing from all the parents and community members. You know, I've received several emails, hearing from individuals during public comment has been very eye-opening, and I really, appreciate hearing everyone's thoughts on this really important issue. And like everyone said, it's a very hard decision, one that I've been thinking about a lot. And, I just think that to the extent that some people, I've been hearing that this is fear-mongering, that we're going to be closing the school. That this is not fear-mongering, this is the reality of what happens when $1.8 billion has been cut from the proposed budget, and we need to be realistic in finding the best solution without moving backwards in our progress in terms of programming. So I too, at this point, am, and by the way, I went to Harborside myself. I was hoping that my future kids would be able to go to Harborside, and I know we're not specifically talking about necessarily that school now, but I'm just saying that right now my position is that just close the school would be the best option here, and it pains me to say it, but that's where I'm at.
Thank you. Anybody else? Mr. Deal?
Thank you. I'll echo what everybody said, but I think it's really important that the elected officials in our city listen to our city, listen to our community. For 5.5 hours over 2 nights, our community came out and they said they do not want this cut. They've said it in election after election. They do not want us to cut education funding. They believe in what the Board of Education is doing. They have come to our meetings and said it. They have gone to the Board of Finance meetings and said it. They have gone to the Board of Aldermen meetings and said it. There is no ambiguity as to where our community stands on this cut. They do not want it to happen. None of us want it to happen. We're all wearing, I'm not wearing the sticker, it's on my computer. It is ridiculous that we are sitting here talking about closing a school, but that is our reality. And I have to say that I was blown away by all of the stories and the research that parents did when they spoke in front of the Board of Aldermen. People brought study upon study upon study. Sometimes it felt like we were listening to Dr. Kataya talk. Frankly, it was a great billboard for our school district, quite honestly. 5.5 hours of people saying over and over and over again, what a great district we have. It's all in the Board of Aldermen's hands. I hope that we do not have to come back here and make that decision to close the school, but if we do, I believe that's our only option as well.
Thank you, Mr. DeYoung. Ms. Boynton?
It was funny, though not funny, when we were talking about storage issues a few minutes ago. My first thought was, oh, if we close the school, where are we gonna put all the stuff? Where are all the chairs and desks gonna go? And it was a really absurd thought. And it just ties into this whole situation, which is extremely absurd. I think that my colleagues have all made such important points tonight that I feel absolutely as well. You know, one of the things that is most disturbing to me is hearing comments from some city officials saying, oh, they can withstand a less than 2% cut. And also that idea that Ms. McDonough-Sousa mentioned about that we're fear-mongering, that, you know, that none of this is really a reality. You know, it is reality. And I struggle every day with thinking about how do we communicate this effectively to City Hall? How do we make them really understand what is happening? Unfortunately, you know, one of the things that I've been hearing is that despite the 5.5 hours of testimony, that except for 1 or 2 alders, that it hasn't really swayed them in either direction, that they are still very neutral. So I know that Dr. Kataya and Ms. Glennon, I know that your presentations are coming up before the Board of Aldermen. I know that you are going to do a fantastic job and you are going to bust all the myths and show all the facts. But if there is anything that we as a board can do to support you, if there are any ideas that you have, I'm sure that I speak on behalf of the majority of us that we really want to be your partners in helping make this happen. You know, I am planning on talking one-on-one with the 3 alders from my district with the hope that perhaps face-to-face that they might actually hear me and really understand what's going on. It's that lack of understanding that really is so disturbing. I don't know why it exists when there is so much information that is out there in the public.
Thank you. Anyone else want to make a comment? Ms. Yerby?
I think, I just want to respond. The distance that people are away from students, I think, just creates sort of a lack of understanding. Even for spring break, we're 1 day back from spring break, and I was away, I was having a great time. And then I come back and I'm talking to my students, and not everyone had a great time. So my students, some of my students are, you know, at home, did nothing, which is fine for sometimes, you know, doing nothing is fine. And then others wanted to do things and couldn't do whatever. So not knowing, and I didn't know that last week. Last week I'm living my own life, doing whatever. Coming back and talking to the students, and I wanted to thank the families that came out, coming back and hearing those, the public comments and the stories from the Board of Aldermen meeting. Listening to the children speak at the meeting meant so much to me. They had so much to say and they said it so well. I think it's so important that everyone tries to remember, to understand that every role is important in the lives of children. So even from teachers, I mean, he said it a number of times in various ways, the teachers, the administration, custodial staff, kitchen, whoever is in their lives is important, and administration has made, you know, have made decisions on what those positions are. and they're important. And for people who are so far removed to try to control that doesn't make sense. It should be trusted that the administration of the public school should know better and should have a better understanding of what the children need, being closer to their needs.
Thank you. Ms. Allen?
I just wanted to say I really appreciate hearing from teachers and coaches tonight. I think that having these evidence-based programs, like moving to a coaching model over an interventionist one, is one of the things that really sets our district apart. And so having these instructional coaches and STEM labs and world language earlier and earlier, these things, I can't imagine cutting any of them. And so I have to agree with others tonight when they said that the only way to really make up this lack of budget would be to close the school, which is so hard to even talk about. So all I can say is I really hope that that money is restored.
Thank you. Anybody else? Mr. Feller, anything to add?
Am I the odd man out? Right? No, I mean, am I the only one that hasn't spoken? Yeah, no, I agree with the rest of my colleagues here that, I mean, trying to close the school is, it seems to be the only way forward to get to that $1.8 million reduction. And that's where my head is at right now. And that's the reality. You know.
Thank you. I have nothing further to add. I mean, I agree with what everybody has said, and it's just really disheartening that we have to have these conversations. So my fingers are crossed, my toes are crossed, and we'll see where things go. We'll have further discussion as we need to. So, with that said, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn at 10:22.
Motion to adjourn.
A second.
Is there any opposed? Hearing none, we're adjourned at 10:22. Thank you.